The Heart of a Dog. By Mikhail Bulgakov, translated by Avril Pyman. Mikhail Bulgakov, 1925. English translation. Copyright Raduga Publishers, Moscow, 1991. Ooh. Look at me, look, I'm dying. The wind under the archway howls at my departing, and I howl with it. I'm done for, done for. That villain in a cook's hat. The chef at the canteen of normative nourishment for the employees of the Central Council of the People's Economy, splashed boiling water at me and scalded my left side. Swine that he is, and him a proletarian. Oh, my God, how it hurts. That boiling water's seared me to the bone. And now I howl and howl, but what's the use of howling? What harm did I ever do him? Surely I won't eat the Council of the People's Economy out of house and home just by poking around in the rubbish. The greedy, grudging beast. Just take a look at his face sometime. It's wider than it's long. A thief with a mug like copper. Ah, good people. It was midday he gave me the boiling water treatment, and now it's dark, 4 o'clock in the afternoon or thereabouts, to judge by the smell of onion from the Prechistenka Fire Brigade. The firemen have buckwheat for supper, as you know. But that's the pits, as bad as mushrooms. Some dogs I know from Prechistenka, by the way, told me that in the restaurant bar on Negliny Alley the plat du jour is mushrooms in sauce piquante at 3 rubles 75 kopecks per portion. An acquired taste. Like licking galoshes. Ooh, my side hurts unbearably and my future prospects are only too clear. Tomorrow I'll be all sores, and what, I ask, am I to do about that? In summer you can sneak off to Sokolniki Park. There's a special kind of grass there, very good for you, and apart from that you can stuff yourself for free with salami ends and lick your fill from the greasy paper folk scatter about. And if it wasn't for the caterwauler who stands on that round platform in the moonlight and sings Beloved Ida to turn your stomach, it would be really first rate. But where can you go now? Have you been booted up the rump? You have. Have you had your ribs dented by bricks? Often enough. I've had everything and I'm resigned. A dog's spirit dies hard. This body of mine, though, it's all broken, all beaten. People have committed just about every outrage you can think of on it. The main thing is that when the boiling water hit me it ate through my coat and there's absolutely no protection for my left side. I may easily get pneumonia, and once that happens, citizens, I'll die of hunger. The proper thing to do if you have pneumonia is to lie under the main stairway at the front entrance, but then who will go out scavenging for me, a bedridden bachelor? It'll get on my lung. I'll crawl about for a while on my stomach, getting weaker and weaker, then any toff who happens along will finish me off with a stick. And those janitors with the badges on their chests will take me by the legs and fling me out on the rubbish cart. Of all the proletariat, janitors are the most vile filth. Human refuse of the basest sort. Chefs vary. Take Vlas. The late Vlas from Prechistenka Street. The lives he saved. Because the most important thing when you are ill is to get hold of a bite to eat, and it could happen, or so the old dogs say, that Vlas would throw you a bone, and with 50 grams of meat on it. God rest his soul for the real character that he was, a gentleman's cook from the establishment of the Counts Tolstoy, not from the Council of Normative Nourishment. The things they get up to there in normative nourishment, it's beyond the mind of dog to understand. They put putrid salt meat in the cabbage soup, you know, and those poor wretched customers of theirs know nothing about it. They come running, gobble it, lap it up. There's one typist, for instance, gets a Category 9 salary of 45 rubles, and if you must know, her lover gives her Persian thread stockings. But what she has to put up with for those stockings. He doesn't do it the normal way but subjects her to French-style lovemaking. Nasty bits of work, those Frenchmen, between you and me. Even if they do eat well, and everything with red wine. Yes, that little typist comes running. You can't afford the bar on 45 a month, you know. She hasn't even enough for the cinema, and the cinema is woman's one comfort in this life. She shudders, screws up her eyes, but she eats, and just think of it. 2 courses for 40 kopecks, and both courses aren't worth more than 15, as the other 25 kopecks have been siphoned off by the senior catering officer. And is that the sort of thing she should be eating? The top of her right lung isn't all that it should be. She has some female disease because of all that French business. They docked her wages at work and now they're feeding her rotten meat at the canteen. There she goes running under the archway in her lover's stockings. Her legs are cold, there's drafts all around her stomach because she's got no more hair on it than I have, and those panties of hers have no warmth in them. Pure illusion, lace trimmed. Tatters for the lover boy. If she tried wearing flannel knickers he'd yell. You're so inelegant. I'm sick of my Matriana. I'm fed up with flannel knickers. From now on things are going to go my way. Now I'm chairman and however much I steal it all goes on the female body, on chocolates, on cremine champagne. Because I did my stint in the Hungry Brigade when I was young, enough is enough, and there is no life beyond the grave. I'm sorry for her, very sorry. But not so sorry as I am for myself. I'm not been unkind to you. Ooh. That witch, the Blizzard, rushed clanging into the gates and caught the young girl over the ear with her broom. It whirled up her brief skirt to show her knees in their cream-colored stockings and a narrow strip of ill-washed, lacy underclothes, swept away her words and powdered the dog with dry snow. Good Lord, what weather, ooh, and what a pain in the stomach. It's the salt meat, the salt meat. And when will all this end? Lowering her head, the girl went over to the offensive and battled her way out through the gates. Once in the open street she was whirled around and around, thrown this way and that, sent spinning in snow spiral, and vanished. But the dog remained under the archway and, in pain from his mutilated side, pressed up against the cold wall, scarcely breathing and firmly resolved not to move from this place but to die where he lay, under the entrance arch. Despair had brought him low. He felt so miserable and bitter, so lonely and afraid, that small canine teardrops like white spots welled from his eyes and dried without falling. His disfigured side was all cavernous hollows and frozen lumps, between which showed the ugly red patches of scalded skin. How unthinking are chefs, how dull-witted and cruel. Sherrick, she had called him like hell. He was a sherrick. A sherrick is something round and well-nourished, stupid, eats porridge, the son of distinguished parents, whereas he was shaggy, lank and tattered, a skinny vagrant, a homeless cur. Still, thanks for the kind words. The door leading into the brightly lit shop across the road banged and from it there emerged a citizen. A citizen, note, and not a comrade. Or even, to be still more precise, a gentleman. The nearer he came the more clearly was this to be seen. A gentleman. You think I judge by the coat? Nonsense. Many people, even from the proletariat, wear overcoats nowadays. True, the collars aren't what they were. There's no getting away from that, but still it's quite possible to confuse them at a distance. It's by the eyes you can tell. From afar and close up. Oh, eyes are very important. Something like a barometer. You can see everything. Who has a great drought in his soul? Who is likely to put the toe of his boot to your ribs for no good reason? Who is himself afraid of everyone and everything? It's the ankles of the last type one really enjoys taking a snap at. You're afraid. Take that. If you're afraid. You deserve grrr gruff woof. The gentleman walked confidently straight through the pillar of snow whipped up by the blizzard and advanced upon the archway. Yes, it was quite clear the sort of man he was. You wouldn't catch him eating rotten salt meat, and if anyone should happen to serve him such a thing he would make a real fuss, write to the newspapers. I, Philip Filipovich, have been served indigestible food. There he came, nearer and nearer. That was a man who ate well and did not have to steal, a man who would not kick you but would not be afraid either, and would not be afraid because he always had enough to eat. He was a gentleman who earned his living by intellectual work. He had a pointed French beard and a gray, downy, dashing mustache such as the French knights of old used to have, but the smell wafting from him on the blizzard was a bad smell. Hospitals. And cigars. What ill wind, one wondered, could he have bought in that rotten little shop? Weren't the posh Okotny Riyadh shops one enough for him? What was that? Salah mi. Sir, if you had only seen what that salami is made of you would not have gone near that shop. Give it to me. The dog made one last effort and, in his madness, crawled out from the archway onto the pavement. The stormwind went off like a gun above his head, flapping the huge lettering on a canvas sign. Is it possible to restore youth? Of course it was possible. The smell restored mine, got me up from my belly, the smell that sent hot waves to contract a stomach empty for the last 48 hours, the smell that overpowered the stink of hospital, the blissful smell of chopped horse meat, garlic and pepper. I feel it, I know it. In the left pocket of his fur coat there is a stick of salami. He is above me now. Oh, my sovereign, look down upon me. I perish. What slavish souls we have. What an ignoble lot is ours. The dog crept on like a serpent on his stomach, tears raining from his eyes. Take note of what that chef did to me. But of course it will never enter your head to give it to me. Oak, I know very well what rich people are like. But when you come to think of it, what good is it to you? What do you want with a bit of putrid horse? Poison like that's not to be gotten from any place but Mosselprim too. And you surely breakfasted today, you who are a great man of world importance, all thanks to the glands in the male sexual organ. Ooh, whatever is happening to the world. It would seem it's early days yet to die, and that despair really is a sin. Lick his hands, what else can I do? The mysterious gentleman bent over the dog and, the golden frames of his eyes flashing, pulled from his right-hand pocket a long, white packet. Without removing his brown gloves, he undid the paper, which was immediately seized by the blizzard, and broke off a piece of the salami, known as Krakow Special. And gave that piece to the dog. Oh, generous personage. Ooh. Phew. The gentleman whistled and added sternly, take. Sherrick again. What a name to give me. Still, call me what you will for such a unique act of kindness. The dog ripped through the skin instantaneously and with a gasp sunk his teeth into the Krakow delicacy and downed it before you could count up to 2. He choked on salami and snow to the point of tears, almost swallowing the string in his avidity. I am ready to lick your hand again and again. I kiss the hem of your trousers, my benefactor. That'll do for now, the gentleman spoke abruptly, in a tone of command. He bent over Sherrick, looked searchingly into the dog's eyes and unexpectedly passed his gloved hand over Sherrick's stomach in an intimate, caressing gesture. Aha, he pronounced significantly. No collar, splendid, just what I need. Come with me, he snapped his fingers. Phew. Come with you. To the end of the world, along Prechistenka to Obukov Alley he did express it. He kissed his boot. Then, at the corner of my Ortby Alley, where the crowd got in their way, he set up such a wild howling that he frightened a lady into sitting on a rubbish bin, after which he once or twice emitted a small whimper to sustain the compassionate attitude. A villainous stray cat masquerading as a Siberian sprang out from behind a drainpipe, having caught a whiff of the salami. The world went dark for Sherrick at the thought that the rich eccentric with a penchant for collecting wounded dogs in gateways might equally well string this thief along with him, and that then he would have to share the delicacy from Mosselprim. For this reason he gnashed his teeth at the cat to such effect that it shinned up the drainpipe as far as the 3rd floor, hissing like a leaking hose. FRRR woof. Be off. The whole of Mosselprim can't provide enough to feed all the tramps on Prechistenka. The gentleman appreciated this show of devotion and, just by the fire station, beneath a window from which issued the pleasant murmuring of a clarinet, he rewarded the dog with another piece, not quite so big this time. Funny fellow. Luring me on. Don't worry. I'm not going anywhere. I'll follow you wherever you say. Phew. Here. Down Obukov. With pleasure. We are very well acquainted with this alley. Phew. Here. With please. Oh, no, you don't. No, there's a uniformed porter at the door. And there's nothing worse than that in the whole world. Many times more dangerous than a janitor. An altogether loathsome breed. More repulsive even than cats. Don't be afraid. Come on. Good day, Philip Filipovich. Good day, Fyodor. Now that is a somebody. My God, who have you landed me onto? Me and my dog's life. What kind of a somebody is this who can lead dogs from the street past a porter into a block of cooperative flats? Just look at him, the creep. Not a word, not a movement. True. His eyes are a bit threatening, but on the whole he's indifferent under that cap with the gold braid. Just as if it were all in the nature of things. He's full of respect, gentlemen, and such respect. All right then, I am with him and following him. See, put that in your pipe and smoke it. It would be good to take a snap at that proletarian horny foot. For all the times the likes of you have tormented me. How many times have you made a mess of my muzzle with your broom, Here, we understand, pray do not worry. Where you go, we will follow. Just lead the way and I'll keep up somehow, in spite of my injured flank. Down from the stairway. No letters for me, Fyodor. Respectfully, from below stairs. No, sir, no, Philip, out over the banister, inquired on a note of horror. Well, his eyes grew round and his mustache bristled. The porter below threw back his head, raised his palm to his mouth and confirmed. Yes, indeed, sir, 4 of them, no less. Good God, I can imagine what will happen to the flat now. What are they doing there? Nothing special, sir. And Fyodor Pavlovich? Gone to get screens and bricks. Going to make partitions. I don't know what the world's coming to. They're going to put people in all the flats except for yours, Philip Filipovich. There's just been a meeting. They've elected a new committee and thrown out the old one. The things that go on. Dear me, phew. I'm coming as quick as I can. My flank is so sore, you see. Permit me to lick your boot. The porter's gold braid disappeared below us. There was a draft of warm air from the central heating on the marble landing. We took one more turn and there we were on the landing of the first floor. There is absolutely no call to learn to read when one can smell meat a mile off. Nevertheless, if you happen to live in Moscow and you have any brains at all, you are bound to pick up your letters, even without any particular instruction. Of the 40,000 dogs in Moscow there can only be the odd idiot who doesn't know the letters for salami. Sharuk had begun to learn by colors. When he was only just 4 months old they hung out blue-green signs all over Moscow bearing the legend MSPO, the meat trade. As we said before, all that was quite unnecessary because you can smell meat anyway. It even led to some confusion when Sharuk, whose sense of smell had been disorientated by the stink of petrol from a passing car, took his cue from the caustic blue-green color and made a raid on Golubizner Bros, electric goods shop. There at the brothers' shop the dog made the acquaintance of isolated electric cable, something to be reckoned with even more seriously than a cabbie's horsewhip. That occasion should be considered the beginning of Sharuk's education. Already out on the pavement it occurred to Sharuk that blue did not necessarily mean meat and, tail tucked between his legs, he recalled, howling from the burning pain, that at all butchers' signs the first letter on the left was a Reba fish because there was a militiaman on duty at its head. Square tiles on the corners of houses in Moscow always, unfailingly meant cheese. The black samovar tap at the head of the next word stood for the ex-owner of a chain of cheese shops whose name was Chichkin, for mountains of red Dutch cheese and ferocious shop assistants, the brutes, dog haters to a man, and sawdust on the floor in that repulsive, evil-smelling cheese if there was someone playing the harmonica, which was really not much better than beloved Ida, and at the same time there was a smell of sausages, then the first letters on the white hoardings could be comfortably deciphered as impro, which meant improper language, and tipping are strictly forbidden. In such places fights would suddenly boil up like whirlpools and people would hit each other in the face with their fists, though to be honest this did not happen often, whereas dogs were always catching it either from napkins or boots. If slightly off hams or tangerines were on show in the window, the letters read GRGRROO sirs. If there were dark bottles with a nasty liquid content W or WI Nur or Wine Eliza of Bros ex-owners. 3. The unknown gentleman who had enticed the dog to the door of his luxurious first-floor flat rang the bell, and the dog immediately raised his eyes to the large black card with gold lettering hanging to one side of the wide door paneled with rosy, ribbed glass. The first three letters he made out straight away. Pro. Pro. But after that came a paunchy two-sided trashy sort of a letter which might mean anything. Surely not proletariat, thought Sherrick with surprise. Impossible. He raised his nose, took another sniff at the fur coat and thought with conviction. No, not so much as a whiff of the proletariat. A learned word and God knows what it means. Unexpectedly, a cheerful light came on behind the pink glass, showing up the black card even more vividly. The door opened without a sound and a pretty young woman in a white apron and a lace cap materialized before the dog and his master. The former was conscious of a divine wave of warmth, and from the woman's skirt there wafted a scent like lily of the valley. This is life, thought the dog. I really fancy this. Do us the honor, Mr. Sherrick. The gentleman ironically ushered him over the threshold, and Sherrick reverently did him the honor, wagging his tail. The rich entrance hall was full of things. A full-length mirror impressed itself on the dog's memory with an immediate reflection of a second shaggy, ragged Sherrick. There were a terrifying pair of antlers high up on the wall, endless fur coats and galoshes, and an opalescent tulip with electricity hanging from the ceiling. Where did you find such a creature, Philip Filipovich? Asked the woman, smiling and helping him take off the heavy coat with its silver fox lining. Good heavens! He's covered in mange. Nonsense. Where do you see mange? Demanded the gentleman with abrupt severity. Having taken, stand still, will you? That jailbird of a chef, the chef, the dog pronounced with pathetic eyes and whimpered. Zina, the gentleman ordered. Into the consulting room with him this instant and bring me my smock. The woman whistled and snapped her fingers, and, after a moment's doubt, the dog followed her. Together they proceeded along a narrow, dimly lit corridor, past one varnished door, went on to the end and then turned left into a dark cupboard of a room to which the dog took an instant dislike because of the ominous smell. The darkness clicked and was transformed into blinding day. Sparkling, shining white lights beaming in at him from every side. Oh no, you don't, the dog howled inwardly. Thanks very much, but I'm not putting up with this. Now I understand. May the devil take you and your salami. You've brought me to a dog's hospital and now you'll pour castor oil down me and chop up that flank of mine which is too sore to be touched with your knives. Hey, where are you off to? Cried the woman called Zina. The dog twisted away from her, gathered himself together and suddenly struck the door with his good side so violently that the thud could be heard all over the flat. He rebounded and began to spin round and round on the spot like a whipped top, overturning a white basket with chunks of cotton wool. As he spun, the walls revolved around him with their glass cupboards full of shiny instruments, and he kept getting glimpses of a white apron and a distorted woman's face. Where are you going, you shaggy devil? Yelled Zina in desperation. You hellhound, you! Where's the back stairs? Wondered the dog. He rolled himself up into a ball and dashed himself against the glass in the hope that this might be a second door. A cloud of splinters flew out, clattering and tinkling. A fat jar leapt out at him full of nasty red stuff which immediately spilt all over the floor, stinking. The real door opened. Stop, you be brute! Shouted the gentleman, struggling into his smock which was half on, half off, and seizing the dog by the leg. Zina, get him by the scruff, the blighter. Heavens alive, what a dog! The door opened wider still and in burst another person of male gender in a smock. Crushing the broken glass underfoot, he made a dive not for the dog but for the cupboard, opened it, and immediately the room was filled with a sweet, sickly smell. Then this person flung himself on the dog from above, stomach first, and Sherrick enthusiastically sunk his teeth into his leg just above the shoelaces. The person grunted but did not lose his head. The sickly liquid set the dog gasping for breath, his head spun and his legs gave way and he keeled over sideways. Thank you, it's the end of my troubles, he thought dreamily as he collapsed onto sharp fragments of glass. This is it. Farewell, Moscow. I'll never see Chichkin again, nor the proletarians, nor Krakow salami. When life returned, his head was still spinning gently, He felt slightly sick and it was as though he had no sore side, it had sunk into sweet oblivion. The dog opened a sleepy right eye and out of the corner of it perceived that he was tightly bandaged round the side and stomach. So they did me after all, the sons of bitches, he thought vaguely. But they made a good job of it, I'll say that for them. From Seville to Granada in the still of the night, an absent-minded, out-of-tune voice struck up from above. The dog opened both eyes in surprise and saw at 2 paces a male leg on a white stool. The trouser leg and longjohns were rolled up and the bare shin was marred by dried blood and iodine. Saints alive! Thought the dog, that must be where I took a bite out of him. My work. Well, that'll mean a beating. You can hear the serenata and the clash of steel so bright. Why did you have to go and bite the doctor, you tramp? Why did you break the glass? Ah, ooh, howled the dog pathetically. Ah, never mind. You've come to. So just lie there, stupid. However did you manage to lure such a nervous dog, Philip Filipovich? Asked a pleasant man's voice and the longjohns of knitted fabric descended. There was a smell of tobacco and a clink of glass phials in the cupboard. By kindness. The only way to deal with a living being. You'll never do anything with an animal by terror, at whatever stage of development. I have always said so. I do say so and I shall continue to say so. They are quite wrong to think that terror will help them. No, sir, no, indeed, it won't help at all. Be it white, red or even brown. Terror has a totally paralyzing effect on the nervous system. Zina, I bought that good-for-nothing a piece of Krakow salami for 1 ruble 40 kopecks. Be so good as to feed him once he stops being sick. There was a crunching sound of glass being swept away and a woman's voice observed flirtatiously. Krakow salami. Gracious, the best he deserves is bits from the butcher's at 20 kopecks. I wouldn't mind the Krakow salami myself. Just you try. I won't have it. Poison to the human stomach, that's what it is. You a grown-up girl and you go putting all sorts of nasty things in your mouth like a child. Don't you dare. I warn you, neither I nor Dr. Bormantel will have any sympathy if you get stomachache. All who claim that another can with thy loveliness compare. A gentle tinkling ringing sound went echoing through the entire flat and from far away in the hall came the spasmodic murmur of voices. The telephone rang. Zina disappeared. Philip Filipovich tossed the dog heaved himself up on uncertain legs but quickly recovered and set off in pursuit of the billowing hem of Philip Filipovich's smock. Again he traversed the narrow corridor but noticed this time that it was brightly lit by a ceiling lamp. When the varnished door opened he entered Philip Filipovich's study and was quite overcome by the decor. First and foremost it all blazed with light. A light burning from the molded ceiling, another on the table, others on the wall and reflected from the glass cupboards. The light poured out over a mass of objects of which the most intriguing was a huge owl sitting on a leafless bough on the wall. Lie down, ordered Philip Filipovich. The carved door opposite opened to admit the man he had bidden who could now, in the bright light, be seen to be very handsome, young, with a pointed beard. The man handed over a sheet of paper and pronounced, "An old patient." Thereupon he vanished soundlessly and Philip Filipovich, spreading out the hem of his smock, took his place behind the vast writing table and immediately assumed an air of the utmost dignity and importance. No, it's not a hospital, I've landed up in some other place, thought the dog in some confusion and lay down on the patterned carpet by the leather sofa. We'll look into that all later. The door opened softly and in came a man who made such an impression on the dog that he gave a small bark, albeit very timidly quiet. Gracious me, you've changed beyond all recognition, my good man. The man coming in bowed with respect and some embarrassment. He. You are a magician and a wonder worker, Professor, he uttered shyly. Take off your trousers, Philip Filipovich commanded and got up. Good Lord, thought the dog, what a creep. On the creep's head grew tufts of completely green hair but at the nape of the neck there was a rusty, tobacco-colored gleam to them. The creep's face was covered with wrinkles, but the complexion was pale pink, like a baby's. The left leg was stiff, He had to drag it behind him across the carpet, but to make up for it the right leg jerked rhythmically. On the lapel of his splendid jacket a precious stone bulged like an eye. The dog was so interested he no longer felt sick. Woof woof. He barked softly. Quiet. How do you sleep, my dear fellow? Hee hee. Are we alone, Professor? It is beyond words, the visitor launched out bashfully. Parole d'honneur. It's 25 years since anything of the sort. The type began undoing his trouser buttons. Would you believe it, Professor? Every night. Naked girls, swarms of them. I am quite enchanted. You are a conjurer. Philip Filipovich smiled absently as he examined the pupils of his visitor's eyes. The latter had at last managed to undo his button. Oh, dear, I'll thrash you. Don't be afraid, he doesn't bite. I don't bite. The dog was taken aback. From the pocket of his trousers the visitor dropped a small envelope on which there was a picture of a beautiful girl with flowing hair. The type gave a little skip, bent down and picked it up, blushing deeply. You be careful, though, warned Philip Filipovich, shaking his finger. Be careful, all the same, don't overdo it. I don't over, the type muttered in embarrassment. It was just an experiment, dear Professor. Well, and what happened? What was the result? Inquired Philip Filipovich severely. The type gestured ecstatically. 25 years, as God is my witness, Professor, there's been nothing of the sort. The last time was in 1899 in Paris on the Rue de la Paix. And why have you gone green? The guest's face grew overcast. That accursed Jurkost. Cosmetics factory. Ed, you can't imagine, Professor, what those good-for-nothings palmed me off with in the guise of hair dye. Just look, muttered the individual, peering round for a mirror. I'd like to smash their faces in, he added, waxing more and more indignant. What am I to do now, Professor? He demanded tearfully. Shave your head. Professor, the visitor exclaimed pitifully, it will grow gray again. Apart from which I won't dare show my face at work. As it is, this is the third day I've kept away. Ah, Professor, if only you could discover a way to restore youth to the hair. Not all at once, my dear fellow, murmured Philip Filipovich. Bending over the patient, eyes shining, he examined his naked stomach. Well now, that's splendid, everything is just as it should be. To tell the truth, I had scarcely expected such a result. Streams of blood, and songs galore. You may get dressed, dear sir. And to the one who's most enchanting. The patient joined in a voice as rattly as an old frying pan and, beaming, began to get back into his clothes. Having tidied himself up, skipping and exhaling perfume, he paid out a packet of white banknotes to Philip Filipovich, caught him by both hands and pressed them tenderly. You need not come for another checkup for 2 weeks, said Philip Filipovich, but nevertheless I must ask you to be careful. Professor. His voice sounded ecstatically from behind the door. You may rest assured. With a last delighted titter, he vanished. The tinkling bell echoed through the flat, the varnished door opened and the bidden man handed Philip Filipovich a piece of paper and announced. The age is not filled in correctly. Probably between 54 and 55. Cardiac sounds are rather muffled. He disappeared only to be replaced by a rustling lady in a dashingly angled hat. And with a sparkling necklace on her flabby, creased neck. There were terrible black bags under her eyes and the cheeks were red like a doll's. She was very ill at ease. Madam, how old are you? Philip Filipovich inquired sternly. The lady took fright and even grew pale under the layer of rouge. Professor, I swear to you, if you only knew what I am going through. Your age, madam, insisted Philip Filipovich more sternly still. On my honor, well, 45, madam. Philip Filipovich raised his voice. There are people waiting for me. Don't waste my time, if you please, you are not the only one. The lady's breast heaved with emotion. I will tell you and you only, as a luminary of science. But I swear to you, it is so appalling. How old are you? Philip Filipovich demanded in a furious falsetto, and his spectacles flashed. 51. Writhing with terror, replied the lady. Take off your knickers, madam, ordered Philip Filipovich with relief and pointed to a high white scaffold in the corner. I swear, Professor, murmured the lady, undoing some kind of press studs on her belt with trembling fingers. That Morris, I confess to you, honestly, from Seville to Granada. Philip Filipovich struck up absent-mindedly and pressed a pedal of the marble washstand. There was a sound of running water. I swear to God, said the lady, and spots of real color broke through the artificial ones on her cheeks. I know this is my last passion. But he's such a bad man. Oh, Professor, he cheats at cards, all Moscow knows it. He can't resist a single disgusting little salesgirl. He is so devilish young, the lady muttered, casting out a screwed-up tangle of lace from beneath her rustling petticoats. The dog's vision blurred and he felt quite giddy. To hell with you, he thought dimly, laying his head on his paws and dozing off for shame. I shan't even try to understand what it's all about. I won't understand anyway. He awoke from the sound of tinkling to see Philip Filipovich throwing some glittering tubes into basin. The spotted lady, hands clasped to her breast, was looking expectantly at Philip Filipovich. The latter, frowning importantly, sat down at his desk and wrote something down. I will graft you the ovaries of a monkey, madam, he announced and gave her a minatory glance. Oh, Professor, not a monkey, surely. Yes, answered Philip Filipovich inexorably. When is the operation? The lady asked in a weak voice, turning pale. From Seville to Granada on Monday. I agree, Professor. Again there was the sound of running water, the feathered hat dipped briefly, then there appeared a bald pate gleaming like china and embraced Philip Filipovich. The dog dozed off again. He no longer felt sick. He was luxuriating in the absence of pain in his flank and the warmth, and even gave a little snore and dreamt a fragment of an agreeable dream in which he managed to pull a whole bunch of feathers from the tail of that owl. Then an excited voice sounded directly above his head. I am too well known in Moscow, Professor. What am I to do? Gentlemen, cried Philip Filipovich with indignation. This is impossible. You must control yourselves. How old is she? 14, Professor, you understand, it will be the end of me if this comes out. In a day or two I should be going abroad on a business trip. But I am not a lawyer, dear sir. Well, wait a couple of years, then marry her. I am married, Professor. Oh, gentlemen, gentlemen. Doors opened, one face succeeded another, the instruments rattled in the cupboard and Philip Filipovich worked on without a break. What a brothel of a flat, thought the dog, but what comfort. What the hell did he need me for, though? Will he let me live here? What an eccentric. He could have a breathtaking dog at the drop of a hat, anything he wanted. But there, perhaps I am good looking. My luck, when you come to think of it. But that owl is trash cheeky. The dog eventually came too late that evening when the bell had ceased tinkling and at the precise moment when the door opened to admit some special visitors. There were 4 of them all at once. All young men and all very modestly dressed. What are those ones after? Thought the dog in some surprise. Philip Filipovich met the guests with considerable hostility. He stood behind his desk and surveyed the intruders as a general the foe. The nostrils of his hawk-like nose expanded. The newcomers shifted from foot to foot. We have come to see you, Professor, said one whose shock of thick, dark hair rose at least 6 inches above his head, on a matter of business. You, my good sirs, are most unwise to be going around without galoshes in weather like this, Philip Filipovich interrupted him reprovingly. In the first place, you will catch cold and, in the second, you have left dirty footprints all over my carpets, and all my carpets are Persian. The one with a shock of hair was struck dumb and all 4 of them gazed at Philip Filipovich in amazement. The silence lasted for several seconds, only broken by the tap-tapping of Philip Filipovich's fingers on the painted wooden plate on his desk. In the first place, we're not gentlemen, pronounced the most youthful of the 4 who had peach-like complexion and was wearing a leather jacket. In the first place, Philip Filipovich interrupted him, are you a man or a woman? The four of them again fell silent and their mouths fell open. This time the first to rally was the one with the shock of hair. "What difference does that make, comrade?" he inquired proudly. "I am a woman," admitted the youth with the peach-like complexion and blushed brightly. After him one of the other newcomers, a blonde in a high fur hat, for some reason best known to himself, blushed a deep red. "In that case you may keep your cap on, but I would request you, good sirs, to take off your hats," pronounced Philip Filipovich quellingly. "Don't sir me," said the blonde, taking off his hat. "We came to you," the one with the shock of hair began again. "First and foremost, who are we?" "We are the new house management committee for this block," said the black-haired fellow with controlled fury. "I am Schwander, she is Vyazemskaya, he is Comrade Pestrukin, and that's Jurovkin. And now it was you they settled into Fyodor Pavlovich Sabelin's flat." "Us," replied Schwander. "Ah, God, how is the house of Kalabukov fallen?" the professor cried out, flinging wide his hands in despair. "Are you joking, Professor?" Schwander asked indignantly. "It's no joking matter," cried the professor, then, in despair. "Whatever will happen to the central heating? Are you making fun of us, Professor Preobrazhensky? What is your business with me? Tell me and make it brief. I am about to go and dine. We, the House Committee," Schwander began with hatred, "have come to you after a general meeting of the inhabitants of our block at which the question of reallocation of living space stood. Who stood on who?" Philip Filipovich raised his voice. "Be so good as to express yourself more clearly." "The question of the reallocation of living space stood on the agenda." "Enough. I understand. You know that according to the resolution of the 12th of August of this year my flat is accepted from any and every reallocation and resettlement." "We know that," replied Schwander. "But the general meeting, after due consideration of the question, came to the conclusion that, by and large, you occupy too much space. Much too much. You live alone in 7 rooms." "I live alone and work in 7 rooms," replied Philip Filipovich, "and I should very much like an 8th. It is quite essential to house my books." The four were lost for words. "An 8th room. Oh ho ho," said the blonde, stripping off his hat. "That's cool. That's indescribable," exclaimed the youth who had turned out to be a— "Excuse me," Schwander interrupted him. "It is precisely about the consulting room and the dining room that we are here. Our general meeting requests you voluntarily, in the interest of labor discipline, to give up your dining room. Nobody in Moscow has a dining room. Not even Isadora Duncan," the woman affirmed in ringing tones. Something came over Philip Filipovich as a result of which his face became a delicate crimson and he did not pronounce another word, waiting for further developments. "And also that you should give up the consulting room," continued Schwander. "Your study can double perfectly well as a consulting room." "I see," Philip Filipovich murmured in a curious voice. "And where am I supposed to partake of food?" "In the bedroom," all four replied in chorus. Philip Filipovich's crimson flush took on a tinge of gray. "To partake of food in the bedroom," he began in slightly muffled voice, "to read in the consulting room, to get dressed in the reception room, to perform operations in the maid's room and to examine people in the dining room. I can well believe that Isadora Duncan does so. Possibly she has dinner in the study and dissects rabbits in the bathroom. But I am not Isadora Duncan," he roared suddenly, and the crimson turned yellow. "I will continue to dine in the dining room and operate in the operating theater. Pray inform the general meeting of this, and I would humbly request you to get back to your own business and leave me to go on partaking of my meals where all normal people do so, that is in the dining room and not in the hall and not in the nursery. In that case, Professor, in view of your stubborn resistance, we shall complain of you to higher authorities." "Aha," said Philip Filipovich. "Is that so?" And his voice took on a suspiciously courteous tone. "May I ask you to wait just one moment? What a fellow," the dog thought with enthusiasm. "Just like me. Oh, he'll bite in a moment. How he'll bite. I don't know how yet, in what way, but he'll bite all right." Adam. I could take that one with the bulging leg just above his boot and the tendons behind the knee. Grrr. Philip Filipovich tapped the telephone, took off the receiver and spoke into it as follows. Please, yes, thank you, give me Pyotr Alexandrovich, if you please. Professor Preobrazhensky. Pyotr Alexandrovich. So glad that I found you. Thank you. Quite well. Pyotr Alexandrovich, your operation will have to be postponed. What? Indefinitely, I'm afraid, just like all the other operations. This is why I am giving up my practice in Moscow. In Russia in general, 4 people have just come in to see me, one of them a woman dressed as a man, 2 armed with revolvers, and are terrorizing me in my own flat with the idea of taking part of it from me. Professor, what are you saying? Began Schwander, his face changing. Pray hold me excused. I cannot bring myself to repeat everything they said. I have no taste for nonsense. Suffice it to say that they propose that I should renounce my consulting room, or in other words should perform operations in a room that I cannot work. I have no right to do so. And so I shall cease my activities, close down the flat and leave for Sochi. I can leave the keys with Schwander. Let him take over the operations. The 4 stood rooted to the spot. The snow melted on their boots. Well, what can one do? I'm very distressed myself. How? Oh, no, Pyotr Alexandrovich. Oh, no, I can't go on like this. My patience is at an end. This is already the 2nd attempt since August. How? As you wish. At the least. But on one condition. I don't mind who, or where or what, but it must be the kind of paper the existence of which would keep Schwander or whoever from even approaching the door of my flat. A paper to end all papers. Factual. Genuine. A warrant. There should be no mention of my name, even. An end to all this. As far as they are concerned, I am dead. Yes, yes, please. Who by? Well, that's another matter. Aha, good. I'll give him the telephone. Be so kind. Philip Filipovich hissed at Schwander. They want a word with you. But, Professor, said Schwander, now flushing, now turning pale, you twisted our words. I must ask you not to use such expressions. At a loss, Schwander took the receiver and said, Hello. Yes, Chairman of the House Committee. We were acting in accordance with the rules. The professor has quite exceptional privileges anyway. We know about his work. We intended to leave him no less than 5 rooms. Well, all right, if that's the case, all right. Red-faced, he hung up and turned round. Ran rings round them. What a fellow, thought the dog with the utmost enthusiasm. Is it some special word he knows, I wonder? Now you can beat me black and blue if you like, but I'm not leaving this place. The 3, mouths open, gaped at the humiliated Schwander. Shameful, that's what it is, he said uncertainly. If there were a discussion now, said the woman, flushing hotly, I would prove to Pyotr Alexandrovich. I beg your pardon, but do you wish to open the discussion this minute? Inquired Philip Filipovich politely. The woman's eyes sparkled. I understand your irony, Professor. We will go now. Only I, as the chairman of Cultural Department of our House, Chairwoman, Philip Filipovich corrected her, would like to ask you. At this point the woman pulled out of her coat front a few brightly colored journals, still damp from the snow, to take a few journals sold for the benefit of German children. 50 kopecks each. No, thank you, replied Philip Filipovich briefly, glancing at the journals. The 4 indicated total amazement, and the woman went the color of cranberry juice. Why do you refuse? No. Why then? I don't want them. There was a short silence. Do you know what, Professor? Said the girl, heaving a deep sigh. If you were not a luminary known to all Europe, and if you had not been interceded for in the most disgraceful manner by the fair man tugged at the end of her jacket, but she shook him off by people who, I am quite sure, we will eventually get to the bottom of, you should be arrested. And what for? Inquired Philip Filipovich with some curiosity. You are a proletariat hater, said the woman proudly. Yes, I do dislike the proletariat, Philip Filipovich agreed sadly and pressed a knob. A bell sounded. A door opened somewhere in the corridor. Zina, called Philip Filipovich, you may serve dinner. You will permit me, gentlemen. The four filed silently out of the study, silently traversed the reception room and the hall, then you could hear the front door closing heavily and resonantly behind them. The dog stood up on its hind legs and made an act of prayerful obeisance to Philip Filipovich. 3 on black bordered plates patterned with flowers of paradise lay slivers of thinly cut smoked salmon and pickled eels. On a heavy board there was a lump of very fresh cheese and, in a little silver dish surrounded by ice, caviar. Amongst the plates stood a selection of small, slim glasses and 3 cut glass decanters with different colored vodkas. All these objects were arrayed on a small marble table, neatly joined to a huge sideboard of carved oak all agleam with glass and silver. In the middle of the room was the table, heavy as a tombstone, spread with a white cloth, and on it were set 2 places, napkins starched and folded into the shape of papal tiaras, and 3 dark bottles. Zina brought in a covered silver dish in which something was sizzling. The aroma arising from the dish was such that the dog's mouth promptly filled with watery saliva. The gardens of Semiramis, he thought, and thudded his tail on the floor like a stick. Bring them here, commanded Philip Filipovich in a resonant voice. Dr. Bormental, I beg you to be circumspect with the caviar. And if you want good advice, pour yourself not the English but the plain Russian vodka. The handsome young man he had bidden now without his smock and dressed in a decent, black suit shrugged his broad shoulders, permitted himself a polite grin and helped himself to the transparent vodka. With the blessing of the state, he inquired. How could you, my dear sir? His host replied. It's spirit. Darya Petrovna makes excellent vodka herself. Don't say so, Philip Filipovich. Brew is excellent vodka. 30 degrees proof. Vodka ought to be 40 degrees, not 30 degrees. That's in the first place, interrupted Philip Filipovich, laying down the law. And, in the second, one can never tell what they put in it. Can you tell me what might come into their heads? Anything, said the bidden young man with conviction. And I am of the same opinion exactly, added Philip Filipovich, and emptied the contents of his glass down his throat in one go. Dr. Bormental, I implore you, pass me that thing there immediately, and if you are going to tell me what it is, I shall be your sworn enemy for the rest of your life. From Seville to Granada. With these words he himself speared something resembling a small, dark square of bread with a clawed silver fork. The bidden man followed his example. Philip Filipovich's eyes gleamed. Is that bad? Demanded Philip Filipovich, chewing. Is that bad? Answer me, my dear doctor. Superb, replied the bidden man sincerely. I should rather say so. Note, Ivan Arnoldovich, that only country squires who have survived the Bolsheviks take cold hors d'oeuvre and soup with their vodka. Any person with the least self-respect operates with hot hors d'oeuvre. And of all hot Moscow hors d'oeuvres, this is the best. They used to prepare them quite splendidly at the Slaviansky Bazaar restaurant. Take it, good dog. If you're going to feed that dog in the dining room, a woman's voice sounded, you'll never get him out again, not for love nor money. Never mind. The poor fellow's hungry. Philip Filipovich offered the dog one of the savories on the end of a fork. It was received with the dexterity of a conjuring trick, after which the fork was thrown with a clatter into the finger bowl. After this a crayfish-scented steam rose from the dishes. The dog sat in the shadow of the tablecloth with the air of a sentry mounting guard over a store of gunpowder. Philip Filipovich, however, tucking the tail of a starched napkin into his shirt collar, held forth. It is not a simple problem, Ivan Arnoldovich. One has to know about food, and, can you imagine, the majority of people do not. You don't just have to know what to eat, but when and how. Philip Filipovich wagged his spoon pontifically. And what to talk about? Yes, indeed. If you have a care for your digestion, my advice is, avoid the subjects of Bolshevism and medicine at the dinner table. And whatever you do, don't read the Soviet newspapers before dinner. But there aren't any other papers. That's what I mean, don't read newspapers. You know that I set up 30 experiments in the clinic. And what do you think? The patients who read no newspapers felt fine. The ones whom I especially ordered to read Pravda Lost Way Medicine. Philip Filipovich, leaning back, rang the bell, and from behind the cherry-colored door curtain appeared Zina. The dog received a thick, pale piece of sturgeon which he did not like, and immediately after that a slice of juicy rare roast beef. Having downed this, the dog suddenly felt that he wanted to sleep and could not bear the sight of any more food. What a queer feeling, he thought, blinking heavy lids. I don't mind if I never set eyes on food again, and to smoke after dinner is a stupid thing to do. The dining room filled up with unpleasant blue smoke. The dog dozed, its head on its front paws. St. Julian is a decent wine, the dog heard through his sleep. Only you can't get it anymore. From somewhere above and to the side came the sound of choral singing, softened by ceilings and carpets. Philip Filipovich rang the bell and Zina came. Zina, what does that mean? They've called another general meeting, Philip Filipovich, answered Zina. Another one, Philip Filipovich exclaimed. Well, I suppose now it's really got underway and the house of Kalabukov is lost indeed. I'll have to go, but the question is, where to? Everything will go now. At first there'll be a sing-song every evening, then the pipes will freeze in the lavatories, then the central heating boiler will burst, etc. And that will be the end of Kalabukov. Philip Filipovich is upset, Zina remarked, smiling as she bore off a pile of plates. How can I help not being upset? Exploded Philip Filipovich. What a house it used to be. You must understand. You are too pessimistic, Philip Filipovich, the handsome bidden man replied. They are very different now, you know. My dear sir, you know me. Do you not? I am a man of fact, a man of observation. I am the enemy of unfounded hypotheses. And that is very well known not only in Russia but in Europe. If I venture an opinion, it is because there is some fact behind it on which I base my conclusions. And here is the fact for you. The coat stand and galoshes rack in our house. Interesting nonsense. Galoshes. There's no joy in galoshes, thought the dog. But he's still an exceptional person. If you please, we will take the rack. Since 1903 I have been living in this house. All this time until March 1917 there was not a single case. And I underline this in red pencil. Not one case that a single pair of galoshes disappeared from our front hall, even though the door was never locked. And note, there are 12 flats here and I receive patients. In March 1917 all the galoshes vanished in a single day, amongst them 2 pairs of my own, 3 walking sticks, a coat and the porter's samovar. And that was the end of the galoshes rack. My dear sir, I won't mention the central heating. I won't mention it. Let us make allowances. When there's a social revolution going on one does without central heating, but I ask you, why, when it all began, did everyone begin to march up and down the Marble Day, do we have to keep our galoshes under lock and key? Why have they removed the carpet from the main staircase? Did Karl Marx forbid us to carpet our staircases? Is it written anywhere in Karl Marx that the second staircase entrance to the Kalabukov house on Prechistenka Street should be boarded up so that all the inhabitants should have to go round the back through the tradesman's entrance? Who requires all this? Why can't the proletariat leave its galoshes downstairs? Why does it have to dirty the marble? But they don't have galoshes, Philip Filipovich, the bidden man tried to contradict. Not so, roared Philip Filipovich in reply and poured himself a glass of wine. I don't approve of liqueurs after dinner. They make one feel heavy and have a bad effect on the liver. Not so at all. They do have galoshes now, and those galoshes are mine. They are precisely those very same galoshes that disappeared in 1917. Who else pinched them, I'd like to know. Did I? Impossible. That bourgeois Sabelin. Philip Filipovich pointed a finger at the ceiling. The very idea is absurd. The sugar manufacturer Polozov. Philip Filipovich pointed to the wall. Never. It was done by those songbirds up there. Yes, indeed. But if only they would take them off when they go upstairs. Philip Filipovich began to turn crimson. And why the hell did they remove the flowers from the landings? Why does the electricity which, if I remember aright, only failed twice in 20 years, now leave us blacked out regularly once a month? Dr. Bormantel, statistics are a fearful thing. You, who have read my latest work, know that better than anyone. It's the disruption, Philip Filipovich. No, Philip Filipovich contradicted him with the utmost certainty. You should be the first, dear Ivan Arnoldovich, to refrain from using that particular word. It is a mirage, smoke, fiction. Philip Filipovich spread wide his short fingers so that two shadows resembling tortoises began to wriggle across the tablecloth. What is this disruption of yours? An old woman with a staff. A witch who goes round knocking out the window panes and putting out the lamps. Why, she doesn't exist at all. What do you mean by the word? Demanded Philip Filipovich furiously of the unfortunate cardboard duck suspended legs uppermost by the sideboard, and answered for it himself. I'll tell you what it means. If I stop doing operations every evening and initiate choir practice in my flat instead, I'll get disruption. If, when I go to the lavatory, I, if you'll forgive the expression, begin to piss and miss the bowl, and Zina and Darya Petrovna do the same, then we get disruption in the lavatory. So it follows that disruption is in the head. So, when all these baritones start calling upon us to beat disruption, I just laugh. Philip Filipovich's face twisted into such a terrible grimace that the bitten man's mouth fell open. Believe me, I just laugh. It means that every one of them should begin by knocking himself over the head. And when he's whacked out all the hallucinations and begins to clean out the barns, the job he was made for, disruption will disappear of its own accord. You can't serve two gods. It is impossible at one and the same time to sweep the tram lines and to organize the fate of a lot of Spanish ragamuffins. No one can do that, doctor, and still less people who are roughly 200 years behind Europe in their general development and are still none too sure how to button up their own trousers. Philip Filipovich was quite carried away. His hawk-like nostrils were extended. Having recuperated his forces thanks to an excellent dinner, he was thundering away like a prophet of olden times, and his hair shone silver. His words reached the sleepy dog like a dull rumbling from beneath the earth. Now the owl with its stupid yellow eyes leapt out at him in his dream, now the foul face of the chef in his dirty white cap, now the dashing mustache of Philip Filipovich, lit by the harsh electric light from beneath the lampshade, now sleepy sleighs scraped past and disappeared, and in the juice of the dog's stomach floated a chewed piece of roast beef. He could make money as a speaker at meetings, the dog thought vaguely through his sleep. Talk the hind leg off a donkey, he would. Still, he seems to be made of money as it is. The policeman on the beat, yelled Philip Filipovich. The policeman. Ooh hoo hoo hoo. Something in the nature of rising bubbles broke in the dog's mind. The policeman. That and that only. And it makes no odds whatsoever whether he has a badge on his chest or wears a red cap. Attach a policeman to every single person and let him have orders to control the vocal impulses of the citizens. You say, disruption. I say to you, doctor, that nothing will change for the better in our house or in any other house for that matter until such time as they put down those singers. As soon as they give up their concerts, and not before, things will change for the better. What counter-revolutionary things you do say, Philip Filipovich, remarked the bitten man jokingly. It's to be hoped you'll not be overheard. No danger to anyone, Philip Filipovich retorted hotly. No counter-revolution whatsoever, and that, by the way, is another word I simply cannot stand. It is an absolute riddle. What does it imply? The devil alone knows. So I say to you that there is no counter-revolution whatsoever behind my words. Just experience of life and common sense. At this point Philip Filipovich untucked the tail of the brilliantly white unfolded napkin from his collar and, crumpling it, put it down on the table next to his unfinished glass of wine. The bitten man rose to his feet and said, Merci. Just a moment, doctor. Philip Filipovich halted him, taking his wallet from a trouser pocket. He narrowed his eyes, counted out some white notes and handed them to the bitten man with the words, Today, Ivan Arnoldovich, you are owed 40 rubles. Be so good. The dog's victim thanked him politely and, blushing, thrust the money into the pocket of his jacket. Do you not need me this evening, Philip Filipovich? He asked. No, thank you, dear doctor. We will not do any more today. In the first place, the rabbit has died and, in the second, Ida is on at the Bolshoi. And it's quite a while since I heard it. One of my favorites, remember. The duet Tari Ra Rim. How do you find the time, Philip Filipovich? Asked the doctor respectfully. The person who always finds time is the one who is never in a hurry, explained his host didactically. Of course, if I began to flutter from meeting to meeting or sing like a nightingale all day long, I wouldn't have time for any of labor. Let them sing at the Bolshoi, and I shall operate. That's how it should be. And no disruption, remember. Ivan Arnoldovich, keep a close watch. The moment there is a suitable fatality, off the operating table, into sterilized isotonic saline and round to me. Don't worry, Philip Filipovich, I have a promise from the pathoanatomists. Good, and in the meantime we'll keep this nervous wreck from the street under observation. Give his side a chance to heal. He's taking thought for me, thought the dog. A very good man. I know who he is. He's a magician, one of those wonder workers and conjurers out of dogs' fairy tales. It can't be that I dreamt it all. What if it is all a dream? The dog shuddered in his sleep. I'll wake up and there'll be nothing left. Not the lamp with the silk cover, nor the warmth, nor feeling full. And it'll all start again. That crazy cold under the archway, the icy tarmac, hunger, unkind people, the canteen, snow. Oh God, how miserable I shall be. But nothing of all this happened. It was the arched gateway that melted away like a foul dream never to return. Evidently the disruption was not so terrible. In spite of it, the gray accordions under the window were filled with heat twice a day and warmth rippled out from them right through the flat. It was quite clear that the dog had drawn the winning ticket in the dog's lottery. No less than twice a day now, his eyes filled with tears of gratitude to the wise man of Prechistenka. Apart from this, all the glass-fronted cupboards in the drawing room reflected a successful, handsome dog. I am a beauty. Perhaps an unknown canine prince, incognito, thought the dog, surveying the shaggy coffee-colored hound with the contented face strolling about in the mirrored distances. It is very probable that my grandmother had an affair with a Newfoundland. That's it. I see I have a white patch on my face. Where did that come from, I wonder? Philip Filipovich is a man of excellent taste. He would not take in any old mongrel stray. In the course of a week, the dog had devoured as much food as in the whole course of his last, hungry month and a half on the street. Only by weight, of course. As to the quality of food in Philip Filipovich's house, there was simply no comparison. Even if one did not count the 18 kopecks worth of scrap meat which Darya Petrovna bought every day from the Smolensk market, one only need mention the titbits from dinner at 7 o'clock in the dining room, which the dog always attended in spite of the protests of the elegant Zina. During these meals Philip Filipovich had been finally elevated to divine status. The dog sat up and begged and nibbled his jacket. The dog learnt Philip Filipovich's ring at the door, 2 sharp authoritative stabs at full pitch, and rushed out barking excitedly to meet him in the hall. The master was all wrapped in silver fox fur, glittering with a million tiny snowflakes. He smelt of tangerines, cigars, scent, lemons, petrol, eau de cologne and cloth, and his voice sounded like a trumpet through the whole flat. Why did you tear up that owl, you scoundrel? What harm did it ever do to you? What harm, I'm asking you? Why did you break Professor Mechnikov? Philip Filipovich, he should be given a good hiding, even if only once, Zina declared indignantly. Or he'll get completely spoilt. Just look what he's done to your galoshes. Nobody should ever be given a hiding, Philip Filipovich said warmly. And don't forget it. People and animals can only be worked upon by suggestion, admonition. Did you give him his meat today? Heavens, he's eating us all out of house and home. How can you ask, Philip Filipovich? I'm surprised he hasn't burst. Well, Let him eat, bless him, but what did that owl ever do to you, hooligan? Ooh ooh. The toady dog whimpered and crept up on his stomach, paws spread. Then he was dragged willy-nilly by the scruff of the neck through the hall into the study. The dog yelped, snapped, dug his claws into the carpet, slid along on his behind as though performing in a circus. In the middle of the study on the carpet lay glass-eyed owl with red rags smelling of mothballs hanging out from its torn stomach. On the table lay the shattered portrait. I haven't cleared up on purpose so that you could see for yourself, Xena informed him, thoroughly upset. He jumped up on the table. You see, the villain. And got it by the tail. Snap. Before I knew where I was, he'd torn it to bits. Push his face into the owl, Philip Filipovich, so that he knows not to spoil things. A howl went up. The dog was dragged, still clinging to the carpet, to have his nose pushed into the owl, shedding bitter tears and thinking. Beat me if you like, only don't turn me out of the flat. Send the owl to the taxidermist without delay. Besides, here, take 8 rubles and 16 kopecks for the tram, go to the central department store and buy him a good collar and a chain. The next day the dog was arrayed in a broad, shiny collar. To begin with, he was very upset when he saw himself in the mirror, tucked his tail between his legs and went slinking off to the bathroom, meditating on how to rub it off on some chest or crate. Very soon, however, the dog understood that this was simply foolish. Xena took him for a walk on the lead along Obukov Alley, and the dog burned with shame as he walked like some felon under arrest, but by the time he had walked the length of Prechistenka as far as the Church of Christ the Savior, he realized what a collar meant in a dog's life. Furious envy was clearly to be seen in the eyes of all the curs they encountered, and at Myortby Alley, a lanky stray who'd lost part of his tail barked ferociously, calling him a bloody aristo and a bootlicker. When they crossed the tram track, the militiaman glanced at the collar with pleasure and respect, and, when they returned home, the most incredible thing happened. Fyodor the porter opened the front door himself to let in Sherek. At the same time he remarked to Xena, My, what a shaggy dog Philip Filipovich has acquired. And remarkably fat. Not surprising, he eats enough for 6, explained Xena, all pink and pretty from the frost. A collar is as good as a briefcase, the dog joked to himself and, wagging his tail, proceeded on up to the first floor like a gentleman. Having discovered the true worth of the collar, the dog stove with the black top. The oven crackled. Between crimson pillars burnt the face of Darya Petrovna, eternally condemned to fiery torment and unslaked passion. It shone and shimmered with grease. In the fashionable hairdo. Down over the ears, then swept back into a twist of fair hair on the nape of the neck, gleamed 22 artificial diamonds. About the walls golden saucepans hung on hooks, and all the kitchen was loud with smells, bubbling and hissing in closed pots. Out! Yelled Darya Petrovna. Out, you thieving stray. You were all I needed. I'll take the poker to you. What's wrong? Now why are you scolding? Ingratiatingly, the dog smiled up at her with half-closed eyes. Now why should you think I'm a thief? Haven't you noticed my collar? And poking his muzzle through the door he crept sideways into the kitchen. Sherek the dog knew some kind of secret to win people's hearts. In 2 days' time he was already lying next to the coal scuttle and watching Darya Petrovna at work. With a long, narrow knife she chopped off the heads and claws of defenseless partridges, then, like a furious executioner, cut meat off the bones, gutted the chickens, passed something through the mincing machine. Meanwhile Sherek was worrying the head of a partridge. From a bowl of milk Darya fished out soaked white bread, mixed it with mincemeat on a wooden board, poured on some cream, and then set about shaping meatballs on the same board. The oven hummed as though there was a regular furnace within it, and from the saucepan came a great grumbling, bubbling and spitting. The stove door opened with a bang to disclose a terrifying hell in which the flames leapt and shimmered. In the evenings, the gaping stone jaws lost their fire, and, in the window of the kitchen above the white half-curtain, there was a glimpse of the dense and solemn Prechistenka night with a single star. It was damp on the floor of the kitchen, the pots and pans gleamed balefully, dully, and on the table lay a fireman's cap. Sherrick lay on the warm stove like a lion on a gate, one ear cocked from curiosity, and looked through the half-open door to Zina's and Darya Petrovna's room where a black-mustached, excited man in a broad leather belt was embracing Darya Petrovna. Her face burned with anguish and passion, all of it, that is, but the indelibly powdered nose. A ray of light illumined a portrait of a man with a black mustache from which was suspended a paper Easter rose. Like a demon, you are, Darya Petrovna murmured in the half-dark. Leave off. Zina'll come any moment now. What's got into you? You been having your youth restored too? Don't need to, the man with the black mustache answered hoarsely, almost beside himself. You're so fiery. In the evening, the star over Prechistenka hid behind heavy curtains and, if Ida was not playing at the Bolshoi and there was no meeting of the ALL Russian Society of Surgeons, the divinity took his place in a deep armchair in the study. There were no ceiling lights. Only one green lamp shone on the table. Sherrick lay on the carpet in the shadow and, fascinated, observed terrible things. Human brains floated in a repulsive, caustic and muddy liquid. The divinity's arms, bare to the elbows, were in reddish, to the sacred shores of the Nile. The divinity hummed quietly to himself, biting his lip and recalling the golden interior of the Bolshoi theater. At this time the radiators were at their hottest. The warmth they gave off rose to the ceiling from which it spread down again through the room and brought to life in the dog's coat the last doomed flea to have escaped Philip Filipovich's careful combing. The carpets muffled all sound in the flat. Then, from far away, the front door clanged. Zina's gone to the cinema, thought the dog, and when she gets back we'll be having supper, I suppose. Today I have reason to believe it will be veal chops. On that terrible day Sherrick was troubled from morning by some kind of premonition. As a result he suddenly felt miserable and ate his breakfast, half a cup of porridge and a mutton bone left over from yesterday, without any enjoyment. He wandered dully into the reception room and gave a little whine at his own reflection. Yet by the afternoon, after Zina had taken him for a walk along the boulevard, the day seemed to have passed as usual. There had been no reception that morning because, as everyone knows, there is no reception on Tuesdays, but the divinity sat in his study with some heavy books with brightly colored pictures open on the table in front of him. They were waiting for dinner. The dog was slightly encouraged by the thought that for the second course, as he had already established in the kitchen, there would be turkey. On his way along the corridor, the dog heard how, in Philip Filipovich's study, the telephone gave a sudden, unpleasant ring. Philip Filipovich took the receiver, listened and suddenly became all excited. Excellent, came his voice. Bring it at once, at once. He fussed round, rang the bell and as Zina came in to answer it ordered her to bring in the dinner at once. Dinner, dinner, dinner. There was an immediate clatter of plates from the dining room. Zina bustled from the kitchen. You could hear Darya Petrovna grumbling that the turkey was not ready. The dog again began to feel disturbed. I don't like disorder in the flat, he thought, and no sooner had he thought this, than the disorder took on a still more unpleasant character. And first and foremost because of the appearance of that Dr. Bormental he had once bidden. He brought with him an evil-smelling suitcase and, without even pausing to take off his coat, hurried down the corridor with it to the consulting room. Philip Filipovich abandoned his cup of coffee half drunk, something he had never done before, and ran. Get out from under my feet, you devil. Hurry, 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 yelled Philip Filipovich and began to ring every bell in the flat, or so it seemed to the dog. Zina came running. Zina, ask Darya Petrovna to go to the telephone, take messages, I'm not receiving anyone. You'll be needed here. Dr. Bormental, I implore you. Hurry, hurry, hurry. I don't like this, I don't like it at all. The dog glowered sulkily and began to wander round the flat, but all the hassle was going on in the consulting room. Zina appeared unexpectedly in a white overall more like a shroud and began to run from the consulting room to the kitchen and back. Maybe I'll go and see what there is to eat. To hell with them all, the dog decided and immediately received a rude shock. Sherrick is not to have anything to eat. The command was thundered from the consulting room. Can't keep an eye on him all the time. Lock him up. And Sherrick was lured into the bathroom and locked up. Cheek, thought Sherrick, sitting in the half-dark bathroom. Simply stupid, and he spent about quarter of an hour in the bathroom in a curious frame of mind. Now resentful, now in some kind of heavy depression. Everything was miserable, muddling all right. You can say goodbye to your galoshes tomorrow. Much respected Philip Filipovich, he thought. You've already had to buy 2 new pairs and now you'll have to buy another. That'll teach you to lock up dogs. But suddenly his furious thoughts took a different turn. Quite vividly he remembered a moment from his earliest youth. A huge sunlit courtyard at the end of the Preobrazhenka street, splinters of sun in bottles, broken bricks, free, stray dogs. No, what's the use? There's no leaving a place like this for any amount of freedom, thought the dog, sniffing dismally. I've got used to it. I'm a gentleman's dog, an intelligent being, acquired a taste for the good things of life. And what is freedom? Smoke, mirage, fiction, the raving of those unhappy Democrats. Then the half-dark of the bathroom became frightening. He howled, flung himself at the door, began to scratch at it. Ooh ooh ooh. His voice resounded through the flat as through a barrel. I'll tear up that owl again, he thought, furiously but helplessly. Then he weakened, lay down for a while, and, when he got up, the hair along his spine bristled because in the bath he thought he saw a repulsive pair of wolf's eyes. In the midst of all this torment the door opened. The dog came out, shook himself and would have headed grumpily for the kitchen had not Zina grasped him by the collar and pulled him firmly towards the consulting room. A chill fear stabbed the dog just beneath the heart. What do they want me for? He thought suspiciously. My flank's healed. I don't understand a thing. His paws slid along the slippery parquet and so he was Nile. Only thanks to a confused aroma could one tell that this was Philip Filipovich. His short gray hair was hidden under a white cap reminiscent of the patriarchal cowl. The divinity was all in white, and above the whiteness, like a stole, was suspended a narrow rubber apron. His hands were in black gloves. The bitten man had on a cowl too. The long table was extended to the maximum, and next to it they had pushed up a small square table on one shining leg. More than for anything else here, the dog conceived a hatred for the man he had bitten, and most of all for the way his eyes were today. Usually bold and straight, today they looked everywhere but at the dog. They were cautious, false, and in their depths lurked the intent to play some nasty, dirty trick, if not to commit an actual crime. The dog looked at him glumly and retired gloomily into the corner. Take off the collar, Zina, said Philip Filipovich quietly. Only don't excite him. Zina's eyes immediately became every bit as repellent as those of the bitten man. She went up and stroked the dog with palpable duplicity. Sherrick gave her a look of profound unease and heartfelt contempt. Well then, you're 3-1. You can take it if you want. Only you should be ashamed. If only I'd known what you'd do to me. Zina took off the collar. The dog shook his head and snorted. The bitten man appeared before him, giving off a foul, sickening smell. Ah, what a filthy thing. Why do I feel so sick, so scared, thought the dog, and backed away from the bitten man. Hurry, doctor, said Philip Filipovich impatiently. The air was filled with a pungent, sweet smell. The bitten man, never taking his worthless eyes off the dog, brought his right hand out from behind his back and quickly smothered the dog's nose with a wad of damp cotton wool. Sherrick was taken by surprise. His head spun slightly, but he managed to jump back. The bitten man was after him like a shot, and this time clapped the wad of cotton wool over his whole face. Immediately he found himself unable to breathe, but once again he tore away. The villain, the thought flashed through his mind. What have I done? And once again he was being smothered. Then, all of a sudden, it seemed to him as though a lake had opened out in the middle of the consulting room, and over its surface on little boats floated the happy ghosts of unheard of, rose-colored dogs. His bones turned soft and his legs buckled under him. Onto the table. A voice cried merrily, and the words of Philip Filipovich dissolved in orange beams of light. The horror vanished and gave way to joy. For a second or two the dog loved the bitten man. Then the world turned upside down, but he could still feel a cold but pleasant hand under his stomach. Then, nothing. For on the narrow operating table the dog Sherrick lay outstretched, and his head. Dr. Bormental, breathing heavily and hurrying, eating away the hair with his clippers, was clipping Sherrick's head. Philip Filipovich, his palms propped on the edge of the table, was observing this procedure with eyes as glittering as the golden rim of his spectacles, and saying excitedly, "Ivan Arnoldovich, the most important moment will be when I enter the Cella Turcica. The instant that happens, I implore you, hand me the processus, and immediately after that put in the stitches. If we get bleeding at that point we'll lose time and we'll lose the dog. Not that there's any chance for him, anyway." He fell silent for a moment, then he narrowed his eyes, looked at the half-shut eyes of the dog which seemed to express something like irony, and added, "Do you know, I shall miss him. Imagine, I've got quite fond of him." He raised his hands as he said this, as though bestowing a blessing on the unfortunate dog Sherrick at the commencement of some arduous adventure. He was taking care that not one speck of dust should settle on the black rubber. From beneath the clipped coat gleamed the dog's whitish skin. Bormental threw away the clippers and armed himself with a razor. He soaped the small, defenseless head and began to shave it. The razor scraped loudly. Here and there spots of blood appeared. Having shaved the head, the bitten man wiped it with a swab soaked in spirit, then stretched out the naked stomach of the dog and pronounced, panting, "Ready." Zina turned on the basin tap and Bormental dashed to wash his hands. Zina doused them with spirit from a glass jar. "May I go now, Philip Filipovich?" she asked, glancing nervously at the dog's shaven head. "You may." Zina went. Bormental continued to bustle around. He applied gauze swabs to Sherrick's head, and there materialized on the table a bald dog's skull no one had ever seen before in a strange, bearded mug. At this point the high priest went into action. He straightened up, fixed his eyes on the dog's skull, and said, "Well, so help us, God." The knife. Bormental extracted a small, curved knife from the glittering pile on the little table and handed it to the high priest. Then he vested himself in the same kind of black gloves. "Is he properly out?" asked Philip Filipovich. "Yes." Philip Filipovich clenched his teeth. His eyes took on a sharp, piercing sparkle and, raising the small knife, he made a long, precise incision in Sherrick's stomach. The skin immediately parted and blood spurted in all directions. Bormental pounced like a predator and began pressing on Sherrick's wound with swabs of gauze, then, using small pincers not unlike sugar tongs, pressed the edges together and it dried up. Bormental's forehead came out in beads of sweat. Philip Filipovich made a second incision, and together the two of them began to excavate Sherrick's body with little hooks, scissors and some kind of clamps. Layers of pink and yellow tissue, weeping a dew of blood, were exposed. Philip Filipovich turned the knife in the body and cried, "Scissors!" The instrument flashed for a moment in the bitten man's hand, then vanished. Like a conjuring trick, Philip Filipovich felt his way deeper in, and in several swiveling movements tore out Sherrick's reproductive organs together with a few dangling ends. Bormental, soaking with effort and excitement, dashed for the glass jar and took from it another wet, dangling scrotum. Short, damp tendrils danced and curled in the hands of the professor and his assistant. Crooked needles emitted staccato clicks in the grip of the pincers. The organ was stitched in the place of Sherrick's. The high priest fell back from the wound, pressed a swab of gauze into it and ordered, "Put in stitches, doctor, this instant." Then he glanced over his shoulder at the round clock on the wall. "Took us 14 minutes, Bormental muttered through clenched teeth and dug the crooked needle into the flaccid skin. Then both were seized with excitement like assassins in a hurry. "The knife!" cried Philip Filipovich. The knife leapt into his hand as if of its own accord, after which Philip Filipovich's face took on a terrifying expression. He bared the porcelain and golden crowns on his teeth and in one stroke drew a red brow band across Shank's forehead. The shaven skin flew back like a scalp. The bone of the skull was laid bare. Philip Filipovich cried. Trepan. Bormental handed him a shining bone-drilling brace. Biting his lip, Philip Filipovich began to drive home the brace and drill out small holes in Sherik's skull about 1 centimeter apart right round the skull. On each he spent no more than 5 seconds. Then with a curiously shaped saw, the tail of which he inserted into the first hole, he began to saw. The skull creaked quietly and shook. Roughly 3 minutes later the top of Sherik's skull had been removed. Then the dome of Sherik's brain was revealed. Gray with bluish veins and reddish spots. Philip Filipovich inserted the scissors into the membrane and opened it up. There was one slender spurt of blood which almost hit the professor in the eye and sprayed his cap. Bormental pounced like a tiger with his artery forceps to stop the gush and it ceased. Sweat was streaming from him in torrents and his face had become all raw and patchy. His eyes flickered from the professor's hand to the plate on the instrument table. As to Philip Filipovich, he had become quite terrible to behold. His breath was harsh, his teeth were bared to the gums. He stripped the membrane from the brain and went in deep, easing the hemispheres of the brain from the cup of the skull. At this moment Bormental began to turn pale, put one hand over Sherik's chest and said hoarsely, "The pulse rate is falling sharply." Philip Filipovich shot him a ferocious look, mumbled something and cut deeper. Bormental broke a glass ampule with a snap, sucked out the syringe and inserted it somewhere close to Sherik's heart. "I'm going for the Sella Turcica," snarled Philip Filipovich and, inserting his slippery, bloody gloves beneath, 5 times already. "Inject." Inconceivable. As he spoke his face took on the expression of an inspired brigand. The doctor drew back his hand and easily plunged the needle into the heart of the dog. "He's alive, but only just," he whispered timidly. "No time to discuss whether or not he's alive," hissed the terrifying Philip Filipovich. "I'm in the cella. He'll die anyway. Ah, the dev to the sacred shores of the Nile, give me the appendage." Bormental handed him a phial in which a white lump attached to a thread was suspended in liquid. With one hand there's no one to equal him in all Europe, thought Bormental hazily. He fished out the bobbing lump and, wielding the scissors with the other, cut out a similar lump from the depths of the dissected hemispheres. Sherik's lump he threw out onto a dish and inserted the new one, together with the thread, into the brain and, with the short fingers, now by some miracle long and supple, dexterously attached it, winding it about with the amber-colored thread. After that he threw out of the head various raspatories and forceps, put the brain back in the bone cup, stood back and asked in a calmer voice, "He's dead, of course." "A thread of a pulse," answered Bormental. "More adrenaline." The professor cast the membranes back over the brain, refitted the sawn-off skull like something made to measure, pulled on the scalp and roared, "Stitch." It took Bormental all of 5 minutes to stitch the skull back in place, breaking 3 needles. And on the blood-bespattered pillow there again appeared the all but extinguished face of Sherik with a ring-like wound on his head. At this stage Philip Filipovich finally dropped back, like a sated vampire, ripped off one glove, shaking out a cloud of sweaty talc, tore the other to pieces, flung it on the floor and rang the bell, pressing the button into the wall. Zina appeared at the door, averting her eyes so as not to see Sherik all covered with blood. The high priest removed his blood-stained cowl with chalky hands and yelled, "A cigarette for me this instant, Zina, a bath and a change of linen." He rested his chin on the edge of the table and with 2 fingers raised the dog's right lid, looked into the clearly agonizing eye and pronounced, "There you are, believe it or not. He hasn't died. He will, though. Drive. Bormental, I'm sorry to lose that dog. He was an affectionate brute, even if he did." Bormental, on the first 2 pages the writing is neat, well spaced and clear, but after that it becomes bold and scrawling and there are many blots. The 22nd of December 1924, Monday. Case notes. The laboratory dog is about 2 years old. Male. Breed. Mongrel. Name. Sherik. Coat sparse, bushy, grayish-brown, darker in some places. Tail. Brownish cream. On the right flank are traces of a totally healed burn. Diet before being taken in by the professor. Poor. After a week. Extremely well nourished. Weight 8 kilograms exclamation mark. Heart, lungs, stomach, temperature the 23rd of December. At 8:30 in the evening, a pioneering operation performed according to the method of Professor Preobrazhensky, the first of its kind in Europe. Under chloroform Sherrick's scrotum was removed and replaced by human testes with seminal vesicles and vasa, taken from a man aged 28, who had died 4 hours and 4 minutes before the operation, and preserved in sterilized isotonic saline according to Professor Preobrazhensky's method. Immediately after this, the brain appendage, the hypophysis, was removed after trepanation of the top of the skull and replaced by the human equivalent from the same man. 8 cubes of chloroform were introduced, 1 camphor injection, 2 injections of adrenaline to the heart. The aim of the operation. The mounting of an experiment by Preobrazhensky of a combined transplant of the hypophysis and the testes to explore the acceptability of hypophysis transplant and its potential for the rejuvenation of the human organism. The operation was performed by Professor P. Preobrazhensky, assisted by Dr. I. A. Bormental. During the night after the operation. Repeated, dangerous weakening of the pulse. Expectation of fatal outcome. Massive doses of camphor according to the Preobrazhensky method. The 24th of December. Some improvement in the morning. Respiratory rate twice above normal. Temperature 42. Camphor subcutaneous. Caffeine injection. The 25th of December. Relapse. Pulse scarcely perceptible. Extremities grow cold. Unreacting pupils. Adrenaline to the heart. Camphor according to the Preobrazhensky method, intravenous injection of saline. The 26th of December. Some improvement. Pulse 180, respiratory rate 92, temperature 41. Camphor, enteral feeding by suppository. The 27th of December. Pulse 152, respiratory rate 50, temperature 39.8, pupils react. Subcutaneous camphor. The 28th of December. Significant improvement. At midday, a sudden bout of heavy perspiration. Temperature 37 degrees. The operational wounds are as they were. Changed dressing. Appetite returns. Fluids by mouth. The 29th of December. Sudden heavy mold of hair from the forehead and sides of the trunk. Called in for consultation. Professor Vasily Vasilyevich Bundarev, who heads the chair of the Department of Skin Diseases and the director of the Model Moscow Veterinary Institute. Both declare that there is no record of such a case in specialist literature. No diagnosis was agreed. Temperature. Normal. Note in pencil: in the evening came the first bark 8:15 p.m. Noteworthy is the sharp change in timbre and lowering of tone. The bark, instead of woo uff on the syllables woo and uff, is an expression faintly reminiscent of a groan. The 30th of December. The molt is taking on the character of total loss of hair. Unexpected result of weight check. Weight is now 30 kilograms owing to growth lengthening of bones. The dog is lying prone as before. The 31st of December. Enormous appetite. A blot appears in the exercise book. After the blot is a hasty scrawl. At 12 minutes past 12 the dog clearly barked a be here. At this point there is a blank space in the exercise book, after which there appears a mistake clearly made in a state of agitation. The 1st of December crossed out and corrected. The 1st of January 1925. Photographed this morning. Distinctly barks aber, repeating the word loudly and, it would seem, joyously. At 3 o'clock this afternoon in large letters it laughed, sending the maid Zina into a dead faint. This evening pronounced 8 times running the word aberalg, aber, in slanting writing in pencil. The professor has decoded the word abervalg, it means glabryba. Something monster. The 2nd of January. Photographed smiling by magnesium flash. Got out of bed and stood confidently for half an hour on his hind legs. Almost my height. A loose leaf inserted into the exercise book. Russian science has narrowly escaped an irreparable loss. Case notes on the illness of Professor Preobrazhensky. At 1 hour 13 minutes. Professor Preobrazhensky went off in a deep faint. As he fell, he bumped his head on the leg of a chair. The 6th of January in a mixture of pencil and violet ink. Today, after his tail fell off, he quite clearly pronounced the word pub. The phonograph is working. God knows what is going on. Blank. I am at a loss. Blank. The professor has cancelled reception. Beginning from 5 o'clock, from the consulting room, where that creature is pacing up and down, you can hear a stream of vulgar oaths and the words a couple more. The 7th of January. He can say a great many words. Cabby. There's no seats. Evening paper. The best present for children and all the swear words in the Russian lexicon. His appearance is strange. Hair remains on the head only, on the chin and the chest. Otherwise he is bald with flaccid skin. His sexual organs are those of an adolescent male. His skull has become considerably more capacious. The forehead is slanting and low. Blank. I really am going mad. Blank. Philip Filipovich still feels unwell. Most of the observations are made by me photographs. Blank. Rumors are spreading about the town. Blank. The consequences are incalculable. In the afternoon today all our alley was chock-a-block with old women and idlers of various kinds. The curious are still hanging around under the windows. A startling piece appeared in the morning paper. The rumors concerning a man from Mars in Obukov Alley are quite unfounded. They have been put about by traders from the Sukharevka market, who will be strictly punished. What man from Mars, damn it. This is becoming a nightmare. Blank. Still better in the Evening Post, which reported that a child had been born able to play the violin. On the same page there is an illustration. A violin and my photograph, subtitled Professor, photograph from Philip Filipovich's album. After we had chased out the reporters, one of them slipped into the kitchen, etc. Blank. The chaos during reception hours. There were 82 calls today. The telephone is disconnected. Childless women have gone crazed and keep coming. Blank. The entire House committee called with Schwander at their head. What for they don't know themselves. The 8th of January. Late this evening the diagnosis was made. Philip Filipovich, like a true scholar, admitted his mistake. The transplant of the hypophysis gives not rejuvenation but total humanization, underlined 3 times. This in no way detracts from the amazing, staggering nature of his discovery. For the first time today Sherrick took a stroll about the flat. Laughed in the corridor at the sight of the electric lamp. Then, accompanied by Philip Filipovich and myself, he proceeded to the study. He stands firmly on his hind paws, crossed out legs, and looks like a small, ill-formed man. In the study he laughed. His smile is unpleasant and appears artificial. Then he scratched the back of his head, looked round, and I noted a new, quite distinctly pronounced word. Bourgeois. He swore. His cursing is methodical, non-stop, and, it would appear, quite devoid of meaning. There is something almost phonographic about it. As though the creature had heard swear words somewhere earlier on and had automatically, subconsciously recorded them in his mind and was now belching them up in wads. But as to that, I'm not a psychiatrist, damn it. The cursing has a surprisingly depressing effect on Philip Filipovich. There are moments when he seems to lose the cool detachment of the scientist observing new phenomena and, as it were, loses patience. So, during the cursing he suddenly nervously yelled out, "Stop." This had no effect whatsoever. After a walk about the study, Sherrick was brought back by our combined efforts to the consulting room. After this Philip Filipovich and I held a consultation. I have to admit here that now, for the first time, I saw that assured and strikingly brilliant man at a loss. Humming to himself, as is his habit, he asked, "And what are we to do now?" and answered his own question literally as follows. Moskvashvaya from Seville up to Granada. Moskvashvaya, dear doctor. I understood nothing. He explained. I am asking you, Ivan Arnoldovich, to go to the Moscow clothes shop and to buy him underclothes, trousers and a jacket. The 9th of January. From this morning his vocabulary has been increasing at the rate of 1 new word every 5 minutes on average, and by whole new phrases. It is as though, having been deep frozen in his consciousness, they are now thawing out and emerging. Once out, the new word remains in use. Since yesterday evening the phonograph has, "I'll teach you," the recognition of America, Primus. The 10th of January. Today for the first time he was dressed. He accepted the vest willingly, even laughing merrily. The underpants he rejected, expressing protest with hoarse cries of "Stand in line, you sons of bitches, stand in line." We succeeded in putting the clothes on. The socks are too big for him. At this point there are some schematic drawings, apparently showing stages of the gradual transformation of a dog's paw into a human foot. The back half of the skeleton of the arch planta grows longer. The toes become elongated. Claws. Repeated systematic training in the use of the lavatory. The servants are quite crushed. But one should note the creature's quick understanding. Things are going better. The 11th of January. Has become completely resigned to the trousers. Today pronounced the long, merry sentence. "You there, mister, with the swell pinstripe. Spare a bit of baccy for me pipe." The hair on his head is light and silky, easy to take for human hair. But traces of dark brown strands remain on the very top. Today the last fluff from the ears went. Colossal appetite. Enjoys salt herring. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon an important event took place. For the first time the words pronounced by the creature were not unrelated to surrounding objects, but were a reaction to them. To be precise, when the professor ordered him not to throw the leftovers on the floor he unexpectedly replied, "Get off my back, you wimp." Philip Filipovich was astonished, then recovered and said, "If you permit yourself ever again to swear at me or the doctor, you'll be in trouble." I photographed Sherrick at that moment. "I am ready to go bail." He understood what the professor said. A gloomy shadow fell on his face. He glowered from beneath his brows with considerable irritation but fell silent. Hurrah! He understands. The 12th of January. Puts his hands in his trouser pockets. We are teaching him not to swear. Whistled the popular tune "Oh Ho, the Apple O." Can sustain a conversation. I cannot restrain myself from venturing a few hypotheses. To hell with rejuvenation for the moment. This other thing is infinitely more important. Professor Preobrazhensky's amazing experiment has opened up one of the secrets of the human brain. From now on the mysterious function of the hypophysis, our brain appendage, has become clear. It predetermines the human image. We may say that the hormones it contains are the most important in the whole organism, image-defining hormones. A whole new sphere of science is being opened up. Homunculus has been created without the help of so much as Faust's retort. The surgeon's scalpel has called into being a new human entity. Professor Preobrazhensky, you are a creator. Blot. But I wander from my theme so he can maintain a conversation. What I suggest happened is this. The hypophysis, having been accepted by the organism after the operation, opened up the speech centers in the dog's brain, and words came flooding out in a rush. In my opinion, we are dealing with a revived and developing, not with a newly created brain. Oh, what a divine confirmation of the theory of evolution. Oh, great chain of life from a stray dog to Mendeleev the chemist. For another hypothesis. Sherrick's brain, during his period as a dog, collected a mass of information. All the words with which he first began to operate are street words. He had heard them and they had been conserved in his mind. Now as I walk along the street I look with secret horror upon every dog I meet. God knows what is stored away in their brains. Blank. Sherrick knew how to read. To read 3 exclamation marks. It was I who guessed this. From Glavryba. He had read it backwards. And I even knew where to look for the solution to this riddle. In the interruption in a dog's optic nerves. Blank. What is going on in Moscow is inconceivable to the mind of man. 7 traders from the Sukharevka market have already been arrested for spreading rumors about the end of the world to be brought upon us by the Bolsheviks. Darya Petrovna said so and even named the day. The 28th of November 1925. On the day of the holy martyr Stephen, the world will crash into a heavenly axis. Some knaves are already giving lectures. We've created such chaos with this hypothesis that the flat is becoming uninhabitable. I have moved in to live here at Professor Preobrazhensky's request and sleep in the reception room with Sherrick. The consulting room now serves as a reception room. Schwander was quite right. The House Committee is delighted at our discomfort. There is not one single whole pane of glass left in the cupboards because at first he would jump at them. It was all we could do to teach him not to. Something odd is happening to Philip. When I told him of my hypotheses and of my hope of turning Sherrick into a highly developed psychic individual, he laughed ironically and replied, "You think so?" His tone was dire. Could I be mistaken? The old boy is onto something. While I write up this case history, he pores over the story of the man from whom we took the hypothesis. A loose leaf inserted in the exercise book. Klim Grigorievich Chugunkin, 25 years old, the inconsistency cf. Page 242 appears in the original text. Ed Single. Non-party member, sympathizer. Brought before the court 3 times and found not guilty the first time for lack of proof. The second time, small, ill-made, enlarged liver alcohol, cause of death. Struck in the heart by a knife in a pub. The stop signal at the Preobrazhensky gate. The old man is totally absorbed in the case of Klim Chugunkin. He muttered something about not having had the wit to examine Chugunkin's whole body in the pathology laboratory. What it is all about I do not understand. Is it not all the same whose hypothesis? The 17th of January. Have not made any entries for several days. Went down with flu. In the course of this time the image has taken on final form. The body has become completely human. B weight is about 108 ibs. C height. Short D head. Small E has begun to smoke. F eats human food. G can dress himself. H can converse smoothly. There's the hypothesis for you. Blot. With this I end this case history. Before us is a new organism. It must be observed from the beginning. Supplement. Stenograms of speech. Phonograph recordings. Photographs. Signed by Professor Preobrazhensky's assistant Dr. Bormental. 6. It was a winter evening. The end of January. The time before dinner, before reception. On the lintel of the door into the reception room hung a white sheet of paper on which was written in the hand of Professor Preobrazhensky. I forbid the eating of sunflower seeds in the flat. P. Preobrazhensky. And in blue pencil, in letters large as cream cakes, in the hand of Bormental. Playing musical instruments between 5 in the evening and 7 in the morning is forbidden. Then, in the hand of Zina. When you get back, tell Philip Filipovich. I don't know where he's gone. Fyodor said he was with Schwander. In the hand of Preobrazhensky. Must I wait 100 years for the glazier? In Darya Petrovna's hand-printed letters. Zina has gone to the shop, said she would bring him. In the dining room everything combined to suggest late evening, thanks to the lamp with the silken shade. The light from the sideboard fell in 2 distinct patches because the mirror glass was stuck over by a diagonal cross from one corner to the other. Philip Filipovich, bending over the table, was absorbed in a huge, outspread newspaper. Lightning distorted his face and from his clenched teeth came a sprinkling of choked back, foreshortened, gurgling words. He was reading a report. There can be no doubt whatsoever that this is his illegitimate, as they used to say in rotten bourgeois society, son. Now we know how the pseudo-scientific bourgeoisie take their pleasures. Anyone can occupy 7 rooms until such time as the shining sword of justice gleams red above their heads. SHVR. Insistently, the sound of a balalaika played with virtuoso skill penetrated through 2 dividing walls, and ornate variations on the moon as shining got all confused in Philip Filipovich's head with the words of the newspaper report in a detestable mix-up. Having read to the end, he made a play of spitting over his shoulder and automatically began to sing under his breath. The moon is shining. Shining the moon is shining got to my brain, that accursed tune. He rang the bell. Zina's face appeared through the curtains. Tell him that it's 5 o'clock. Time to stop, and call him in here, please. Philip Filipovich sat at the table in his armchair. Between the fingers of his left hand projected the brown end of a cigar. By the door curtain, lounging against the lintel, legs crossed, stood a small man of unprepossessing appearance. The hair on his head grew in harsh outcroppings like bushes on an uprooted field, and his face was covered by an unshaven downy stubble. The brow was startlingly low. Almost immediately above the thick, black, unkempt brows rose the brush-like hair of the head. The jacket with the tear under the left armpit had wisps of straw sticking to it. The striped trousers were torn on the right knee and stained lilac on the left. Knotted round the man's neck was an electric blue tie speared into place by an artificial ruby pin. The color of this tie was so loud that Philip Filipovich, from time to time closing his weary eyes, seemed to see against a background of total darkness, now on the ceiling and now on the wall, a blazing torch with a pale blue halo. Opening his eyes, he was at once blinded again because, showering out a fan of light from the floor, a pair of patent leather shoes topped by white spats immediately took and held the eye. As if he were wearing galoshes, Philip Filipovich thought with a feeling of repulsion, sighed, sniffed, and began to fiddle with his extinguished cigar. The man at the door stood smoking a cigarette, scattering the ash over his shirt front, and shooting the odd glance at the professor from dull eyes. The clock on the wall with the wooden partridge struck 5 times. Inside it, something continued to groan as Philip Filipovich opened the conversation. "I believe I have already twice requested you not to use the high bunk in," replied. "The air suits us better in the kitchen." His voice was strange, rather muffled, yet at the same time resonant, as though it came from inside a small barrel. Philip Filipovich shook his head and asked, "Where did that repulsive object come from?" "I refer to the tie." Eyes following the finger, the fellow squinted over his pouting lip to gaze fondly at the tie. "What's repulsive about it?" The man said. "It's a smart tie. Darya Petrovna gave it me." "Darya Petrovna gave you an abomination, only exceeded by the style of those shoes." "What sort of glittering trash are they made of? Where did you get them?" "What did I ask you to do? Get some respectable shoes. And what do you appear in? Surely Dr. Bormantel did not choose those. I told him to get patent leather. Am I worse than other people? Just take a walk down the Kuznetsky 5. They're all wearing patents." Philip Filipovich turned his head and said with emphasis, "Sleeping in the kitchen must stop. Do you understand? It is an impertinence. You are in the way there. There are women." The man's face grew dark and he pouted. "Huh. Women. Hoity-toity. Fine ladies. An ordinary servant she is and puts on enough side for a commissar's wife. It's all that slut Zina telling tales." Philip Filipovich gave him a quelling glance. "Do not dare to call Zina a slut. Do you understand?" Silence. "Do you understand? I ask you." "I understand. Take that obscenity off your neck. You just take a look at yourself in the mirror and see what kind of figure you cut. Some sort of clown. And don't throw your cigarette butts on the floor, for the 100th time. I don't want to hear one more swear word in this flat. Ever. Don't spit. There is the spittoon. Don't make a mess in the lavatory. Do not even talk to Zina anymore. She complains that you wait for her in dark corners. You be careful. Who answered a patient's inquiry the devil alone knows. Single quote. Where do you think you are? In some kind of low dive. Why are you so strict with me, Dad? The man suddenly burst out in a tearful whine. Philip Filipovich blushed. His spectacles glittered. Who are you calling Dad? What do you mean by such familiarity? I never want to hear that word again. You are to address me by my name and patronymic. A cheeky expression flared up in the man's face. Why are you like that all the time? Don't spit. Don't smoke. Don't go there. What is all this? I'd like to know. There's as many rules as for passengers on the tram. Why do you make my life a misery? And as for my calling you Dad, you've no call to object to that. Did I ask to have that operation? The man's voice rose to an indignant bark. A fine business. They go and grab hold of an animal. Didn't give my permission for the operation. And by the same token, the man looked up at the ceiling as though recalling some kind of formula, and by the same token, neither did my next of kin. I may well have the right to sue you. Philip Filipovich's eyes grew completely round, the cigar dropped from his hand. What a type! Flashed through his head. You wish to complain that you have been turned into a man? He demanded, eyes narrowing. Perhaps you prefer to scavenge amongst the rubbish heaps. To freeze under the gateways. Now if I had known that. Why do you keep on at me? Rubbish heaps, rubbish heaps. I was making an honest living. And if I'd died under your knife? What have you to say to that, comrade? Philip Filipovich. Philip Filipovich exclaimed irritably. I am no comrade of yours. This is monstrous. A nightmare. A nightmare. The thought came unbidden to his mind. Well, yes, of course, how else, the man said ironically and victoriously. We understand. Of course we are no comrade of yours. How could we be? We never had the benefit of being taught at universities, we never lived in flats with 15 rooms and bathrooms. Only now the time has come to leave all that behind you. At the present time everybody has their rights. Blanching, Philip Filipovich listened to the man's reasoning. The latter paused in his tirade and demonstratively headed for the ashtray with a chewed cigarette end in his hand. His walk was ungainly. He took a long time squashing the stub into the shell with an expression that clearly said, Garn, take that. Having put out the cigarette, on his way back to the door he suddenly snapped his teeth and buried his nose in his armpit. Use your fingers to catch fleas. Your fingers, yelled Philip Filipovich furiously. I cannot conceive where you get them from. Well, you don't think I breed them specially, do you? The man said in injured tones. Fleas like me, that's all there is to it. Whereupon he searched the lining of his sleeve with his finger and released a puff of light orangey red cotton wool into the air. Philip Filipovich raised his eyes to the garlands on the ceiling and began to drum on the table with his fingers. Having executed the flea, the man went to sit down. When he was seated he raised his hands and relaxed the wrists, letting them drop along the lapels of his jacket. His eyes appeared glued to the pattern of the parquet. He was surveying his shoes, which gave him great pleasure. Philip Filipovich glanced in the direction of the brilliantly twinkling stumpy toes and said, What else did you want to see me about? What else? Simple enough. Documents. I need a document, Philip Filipovich. Philip Filipovich twitched slightly. The devil. A document. Yes indeed but perhaps, somehow or other, it might be possible. His voice sounded uncertain and doomed. Where's your common sense? House committee? What has the House committee to do with it? What do you mean, what? They happened to run into me and they asked, when are you going to register as an inhabitant of this house? Oh, Lord! Exclaimed Philip Filipovich miserably. They happened to run into you, they asked. I can imagine what you told them. I forbade you to go slinking around on the stairs. What do you think I am, a convict? The man demanded on a note of surprise, and even the red pin at his throat glowed up with the awareness of injured innocence. What do you mean by, go slinking around? I take exception to such words. I walk, like everybody else. As he spoke he stamped his lacquered feet on the parquet. Philip Filipovich fell silent. His eyes wandered. Self-control, he thought. One must, after all, control oneself. He made for the sideboard and downed a glass of water in one gulp. Excellent, he said more calmly. We won't argue over words. So, what has your charming House committee to say for itself? What do you suppose it says? Anyway, there's no call to go branding them as charming. They defend people's interests. Whose interests, may one ask? Everyone knows that. The working class elements. Philip Filipovich's eyes bulged. Why, pray, should you consider yourself a worker? That's obvious. I'm no Nepman. 6. Right then, let that pass. And so, what precisely does it require of me in defense of your revolutionary interests? That's obvious. You ought to register me. They say. Whoever heard of anyone living in Moscow without being properly registered? That's for starters. Then the most important thing is to have a record card. I don't want to be taken for a deserter. Then again there's the union, the labor exchange 7, and how, pray, am I to go about registering you? On the basis of this tablecloth, perhaps, or of my own passport. One must, after all, make allowances for the situation. Don't forget that you are. You see, you are, so to speak, an unexpected development, a being that originated in the laboratory. Philip Filipovich spoke with ever-decreasing assurance. The man preserved a triumphant silence. Excellent. What, in the last analysis, do we need in order to arrange everything to the satisfaction of that house committee of yours? You have neither name nor surname. I can't be blamed for that. All I have to do is to choose a name for myself. I announce it in the newspaper, and that's it. And what do you wish to be called? The man straightened his tie and replied. Polygraph Polygraphovich. Don't play the fool, frowned Philip Filipovich. I am speaking mustn't swear, I mustn't spit. But all I ever hear from you is, fool, fool. I see that in the RSFSR swearing must be for professors only. Philip Filipovich flushed heavily, poured himself out a glass of water and smashed it. Having recruited his forces from another glass, he thought, if he goes on this way he'll be telling me how I should behave, and he'll be absolutely right. I am losing my self-control. He half turned in his chair, bowing slightly from the waist with exaggerated courtesy and with iron resolve forced out. I beg your pardon. My nerves are playing me up. Your choice of name seemed curious to me. Where, I would be interested to know, did you dig it up? The House Committee advised me. We looked through the calendar and they said to me, what do you fancy? So I chose that one. There could not possibly be anything of the sort in any calendar. Now you do surprise me, the man smiled sarcastically. Considering it's hanging in your consulting room. Philip Filipovich, without getting up from his chair, leant over to the bell on the wall. Zina answered his ring. The calendar from the consulting room. There was a pause. Zina returned with the calendar. Philip Filipovich asked, where? His day is celebrated on the 4th of March. Show me him, damn it, into the stove with it, Zina, this moment. Zina, eyes popping with fright, went off with the calendar and the man shook his head reproachfully. And may I know your surname? I am prepared to accept my hereditary surname. What's that? Hereditary. And that is Sharikov. Blank. Before the desk in the study stood the chairman of the House Committee, Schwander, wearing a leather jacket. Bormantel sat in the armchair. The rosy cheeks of the doctor, he had just come in out of the frost, wore the same lost expression as was to be seen on the face of Philip Filipovich, who was sitting next to him. What should I write? He asked impatiently. Well, said Schwander, there's nothing complicated about it. Write an attestation, citizen professor. That for this, that or the other reason, you know the person presenting the aforesaid to be in actual fact Sharikov, Polygraph Polygraphovich, who was, born here in your flat. Bormantel made a bewildered movement in his chair. Philip Filipovich tugged at his mustache. What a devilish situation. You can't imagine anything more idiotic. There can be no question of his having been born. He simply it is for you to decide, remarked Schwander with quiet malice. Whether or not he was born, taken, reflection of his tie mirrored in the depths of the glass. I would be most grateful, Philip Filipovich retorted, if you would keep out of this conversation. You have no grounds for saying it was simple. It was very far from simple. Why should I keep out of it? Mumbled Sharikov, taking offense. Schwander immediately supported him. Forgive me, Professor, Citizen Sharikov is quite right. It is his right to take part in any discussion about his own fate, and more especially as we are speaking of documents. One's document is the most important thing in the world. At that moment a deafening ringing above their heads interrupted the conversation. Philip Filipovich said, yes, into the receiver, flushed and shouted. Pray do not disturb me on matters of no importance. What business is it of yours? And hung up with some violence. Pure joy spread over Schwander's face. Philip Filipovich, scarlet in the face, cried out. In a word, let us get this over and done with. He tore a piece of paper from the block and wrote down a few words, then read aloud in an exasperated voice. I hereby certify the devil alone knows what this is all about. That the person presenting this paper is a human being obtained during a laboratory experiment on the brain, who requires documents. Damn it. In general, I am against obtaining these idiotic documents. Signature. Professor Preobrazhensky. Rather curious, Professor, said Schwander in an injured voice, how can you say documents are idiotic? I cannot give permission for any person without documents to reside in this house, particularly one not registered for the reserve with the militia. What if all of a sudden there was a war against the imperialist predators? I'm not going to war, not for anyone. Sherikov yelped, frowning into the bookcase. Schwander was taken aback, but recovered immediately and remarked politely to Sherikov. You, Citizen Sherikov, are speaking in a very irresponsible manner. It is essential to register for the reserve. I'll register for the reserve all right, but as to going to war, you can stuff that one, replied Sherikov, straightening his tie. It was Schwander's turn to be embarrassed. Preobrazhensky exchanged malicious but anguished glances with Bormental. There is a moral to be drawn, don't you think? Bormental nodded significantly. I was severely wounded in the course of the operation, whined Sherikov. Look what they did to me, and he pointed to his head. Around the forehead ran the scar from the operation, still very fresh. Are you an anarchist individualist? Asked Schwander, raising his brows. I ought to have exemption on medical grounds, Sherikov replied to this one. A white ticket. Well, we'll see, that. Here, listen, Philip Filipovich suddenly interrupted him, clearly tormented by some secret thought. You don't happen to have a spare room somewhere in this house, do you? I would agree to buy it from you. Yellow sparks appeared in Schwander's brown eyes. No, Professor, I deeply regret, I have no spare room. And I won't have. Philip Filipovich pursed his lips and said nothing. Again the telephone rang out shrilly. Philip Filipovich, without answering, silently tipped the receiver off the hook so that it hung suspended on the pale blue cord. They all jumped. The old man's feeling the strain, thought Bormental, and Schwander, eyes flashing, nodded and left. Sherikov, the soles of his shoes squeaking, followed him. The professor was left alone with Bormental. After a short silence Philip Filipovich gave his head a little shake and said, This is a nightmare, upon my word. Do you see what is going on? I swear to you, my dear doctor, that I am more exhausted as a result of the last 2 weeks than from the whole of the last 14 years. What a type. And let me tell you, somewhere far away there was a muffled sound of cracking glass, then a suppressed female squeal, almost immediately extinguished. Something went zigzagging wildly along the corridor wallpaper in the direction of the consulting room, where there was a sound of a heavy fall, immediately after which the thing came flying back. There was a banging of doors, and from the kitchen a deep bellow from Darya Petrovna. Then a howl from Sherikov. Good God, now what's happened? Cried Philip Filipovich, charging for the door. A cat, Bormental realized, and darted out after him. They dashed along the corridor into the hall, burst into it, and turned from there into the corridor towards the lavatory and bathroom. Zina leapt out from the kitchen straight into the arms of Philip Filipovich. How many times have I ordered that there should be no cats? Yelled Philip Filipovich, quite beside himself. Where is it? Ivan Arnoldovich, for God's sake go and reassure the patients in reception. In the bathroom, the devil, he's sitting in the bathroom, cried Zina, quite out of breath. Philip Filipovich put his shoulder to the bathroom door, but it would not open. Open up. This instant. In answer something leapt around the bathroom walls, bowls were scattered, and Sherikov's wild voice sounded in a muffled roar from behind the door. I'll get you, I'll have your guts. There was a sound of water running along the pipes, then pouring out. Philip Filipovich put all his weight on the door and began to force it. Darya Petrovna, all disheveled and steamy, her face distorted, appeared on the threshold of the kitchen. Then the high-up pane of glass right up against the ceiling between the bathroom and the kitchen cracked right across in a snaky line. 2 fragments of glass came tumbling down, and after them crashed a tiger-colored fierce cat of vast size with a pale blue ribbon round its neck and a distinct resemblance to a militiaman. It landed plump on the table in the middle of a large oval dish which cracked from end to end, leapt from the dish onto the floor, performed a pirouette on 3 legs, waving the 4th as if in a ballet, and promptly filtered itself through the narrow opening onto the back stairs. The gap grew wider, and in place of the cat the face of an old woman in a headscarf peered in at the door. The old woman's billowing skirt scattered with white polka dots followed her head into the kitchen. Rubbing her sunken mouth with index finger and thumb, she took in the kitchen with one glance of her sharp, swollen eyes and pronounced with undisguised curiosity, "Oh, Lord Jesus Christ." White-faced, Philip Filipovich strode across the kitchen and asked the old woman on a note of menace, "What do you want?" "I'm curious to see the talking dog," answered the old woman placatingly and crossed herself. Philip Filipovich turned paler still, went right up to the old woman and whispered in a breathless voice, Out of the kitchen this minute." The old woman backed away to the door and said in injured tones, "That's very rude of you, Professor." "Out, I say," repeated Philip Filipovich, and his eyes grew round as an owl's. He slammed the back door behind the old woman with his own hand. "Darya Petrovna, I especially asked you." "Philip Filipovich," replied Darya Petrovna, doubling her bare hands into fists. "What can I do? There are people trying to get in all day long. I've no time for my own work." The water in the bathroom continued to roar, a muffled menace, but there was no further sound of voices. Dr. Bormental came into the kitchen. "Ivan Arnoldovich, I beg you, how many patients have you got out there?" 11. "Let them all go. I shall cancel reception for today." Philip Filipovich rapped on the door of the bathroom with his knuckles. "Come out this instant. Why have you locked yourself in?" "Woohoo," answered Sherikov's voice dully and pitifully. "What the hell? I can't hear. Turn off the water." "Woof. Woof. Turn off the water, I said." "What's he done? I don't understand," cried Philip Filipovich, losing all self-control. Zina and Darya Petrovna opened the door and peered out from the kitchen. Philip Filipovich battered on the door with his fist once again. "There he is!" yelled Darya Petrovna from the kitchen. Philip Filipovich rushed to her side. From the broken window under the ceiling had appeared and was now protruding the face of Polygraph Polygrafovich. Sherikov, himself thoroughly upset and frightened, looked round and replied, "I've locked myself in. Draw back the bolt." "What's the matter with you? You've seen a bolt before, haven't you?" "The damn thing won't open," answered Sherikov in some alarm. "Oh, heavens! He's put it on double lock," cried Zina and threw up her hands. "There is a button there," yelled Philip Filipovich, trying to make his voice heard above the running water. "Press it down. Press it down." Sherikov disappeared and a moment later reappeared at the window. "I can't see my pa before my face," he yapped. "Turn on the light. He's run mad." "That filthy great torn smashed the bulb," replied Sherikov, "and when I tried to seize the blighter by the legs I pulled out the tap and now I can't find it." All three threw up their hands and froze where they stood. 5 minutes later Bormental, Zina and Darya Petrovna were sitting in a row on a wet carpet rolled up against the bottom of the bathroom door, pressing it against the crack with their behinds, and the porter Fyodor was clambering up a wooden ladder to the high window, holding a lighted wax candle with a white bow, a memento of Darya Petrovna's wedding. His bottom, clad in bold gray check, stuck in the opening for a moment, then vanished. "Do-hoo-hoo," Sherikov's voice sounded through the rush of water. Then Fyodor's. "Philip Filipovich, we'll have to open the door anyway. Let it run out, we'll pump it from the kitchen." "Open, then," cried Philip Filipovich angrily. The 3 sentries rose from the carpet. Someone pushed the door from inside the bathroom and, immediately, the water flooded out into the small corridor. Here it divided into 3 streams. straight ahead into the lavatory opposite, to the right into the kitchen and to the left into the hall. Paddling and jumping, Zina reached the door and closed it. Fyodor emerged ankle-deep in water and, for some reason, with a broad grin on his face. He was all wet, like a seaman in his oilcloth. Only just managed to get the tap back in, the pressure's very strong, he explained. Where's that? Philip Filipovich raised one leg with a curse. Afraid to come out, explained Fyodor with a stupid grin. You going to beat me, Dad? Came Sherikov's tearful whine from the bathroom. Idiot, responded Philip Filipovich succinctly. Zina and Darya Petrovna, their skirts tucked up to the knees and bare-legged, Sherikov and the porter both with rolled-up trousers and bare feet, worked away mopping up the kitchen with sopping rags, wringing them out into dirty buckets or the basin. The abandoned oven hummed. The water seeped away under the door onto the echoing staircase and plunged into the stair. There will be no reception today. The professor is unwell. Be so kind as to move away from the door, we've had a burst pipe. But when is the reception? The voice behind the door insisted. I would only take up 1 minute. I can't. Bormental rocked from toes to heels. The professor is in bed and we have a burst pipe. I'll try to arrange it for tomorrow. Zina, my dear, come and mop the water up from here or it will run out onto the front stairs. The rags aren't absorbing. We'll bail it out with mugs, came Fyodor's voice. Coming. People kept ringing at the door and Bormental was already standing with the soles of his shoes in the water. When will the operation take place? A voice insisted and someone tried to insert himself into the crack. We've had a burst pipe. I'd be all right. In galoshes bluish silhouettes appeared beyond the door. No, please come tomorrow. But I have an appointment. Tomorrow. There's been an accident with the water system. Fyodor, at the doctor's feet, was floundering about in the hall scraping with a mug, but the scratched Sherikov had thought up a new method. He had made a roll out of a huge rag, lay on his stomach in the water and swished it back before the roll into the lavatory. Why are you spreading it all over the flat, you hobgoblin? Scolded Darya Petrovna. Pour it down the sink. No time for the sink, replied Sherikov, scooping up the cloudy water with his hands. It'll get out into the front staircase. A small bench slid out from the corridor with a rasping sound. Very erect and superbly balanced, Philip Filipovich propelled it along, his feet clad in blue striped socks. Ivan Arnoldovich, there's no need to answer the door. Go to the bedroom. I'll give you a pair of slippers. Don't bother, Philip Filipovich, it's not worth troubling your head. Then put on galoshes. It doesn't matter, honestly. My feet are wet anyway. Oh dear me. Philip Filipovich was upset. What a nasty animal. Sherikov unexpectedly chimed in and hopped out in a squatting position with a soup bowl in one hand. Bormental slammed the door, unable to contain himself any longer, and burst out laughing. Philip Filipovich's nostrils expanded and his spectacles glinted. Who are you speaking of? He asked Sherikov from his superior height. If I may, you, continued Philip Filipovich, are an insolent fellow. How dare you say such a thing? You are the cause of all this and you but know. It's beyond everything. Sherikov, tell me, please, said Bormental, how long are you going to go on chasing cats? You should be ashamed of yourself. It's a disgrace. You're a barbarian. Why am I a barbarian? Muttered Sherikov sulkily. I'm no barbarian. There's no bearing with him in the flat. Always on the lookout for something to steal. He ate all Darya's mince. I wanted to give him a good hiding. It's you who should be given a good hiding, said Philip Filipovich. Just look at your face in the mirror. He almost scratched my eyes out, Sherikov responded glumly, dabbing at his eye with a wet, dirty hand. By the time the parquet, which had turned black from the damp, had dried out somewhat, and all the mirrors were covered with a veil of steam, the doorbell had ceased to ring. Philip Filipovich, in red Morocco slippers, stood in the hall. There you are, Fyodor. Many thanks. Go and get changed at once. Ah, I know. Go and ask Darya Petrovna to pour you a glass of vodka. Thank you very much indeed, Fyodor hesitated, then said. There's another thing, Philip Filipovich. I do beg pardon, I feel it's really a shame to trouble you. Only, for a pane of glass in flat number 7 Citizen Sherikov threw stones at the cat, asked Philip Filipovich, frowning like a thundercloud. That's the trouble. At the owner of the flat. He's threatened to go to law. The devil. Sherikov was cuddling his cook, so he chased him. And they had an argument. For goodness sake, always tell me about such things at once. How much? 1.5. Philip Filipovich produced 3 shiny 50-kopeck pieces and handed them to Fyodor. Fancy paying 1.5 rubles for such a filthy swine, a hollow voice sounded from the door. He himself, Philip Filipovich, swung round, bit his lip and silently bore down on Sherikov, pressing him into the reception room where he immediately turned the key on him. From inside, Sherikov immediately started banging on the door with his fists. Don't you dare! Exclaimed Philip Filipovich in a clearly sick voice. Well, if that doesn't beat all, remarked Fyodor significantly. Never in all my born days have I seen such an impertinent brute. Bormental appeared as if from under the earth. Philip Filipovich, please don't upset yourself. The energetic young doctor opened the door into the hall, and from there you could hear his voice. Where do you think you are? In a pub, or what? That's the way, the decisive Fyodor added. That's the way, and a clip over the ear. Ah, Fyodor, how can you say such things? Muttered Philip Filipovich gruffly. But I'm sorry for you, Philip Filipovich. 7 No, no and no, said Bormental insistently. Be so good as to tuck in your napkin. What's wrong now, for God's sake? Growled Sherikov crossly. Thank you, doctor, said Philip Filipovich gratefully. I'm tired of making critical remarks. I will not allow you to eat till you tuck it in. Zina, take the mayonnaise from Sherikov. What do you mean, take? Sherikov was upset. I'm tucking it in. With his left hand he hid the dish from Zina, and with his right put the napkin into his collar, which at once made him look like a client at the barber's. And please use your fork, added Bormental. Sherikov gave a long sigh and began to fish for pieces of sturgeon in the thick sauce. Another glass of vodka, he announced on a tentative note. Don't you think you've had enough? Asked Bormental. You've been making rather free with the vodka lately. Do you grudge it? Sherikov inquired, darting a glance at him from under his brows. Nonsense, declared the austere Philip Filipovich, but Bormental interrupted. Don't trouble yourself, Philip Filipovich. Leave it to me. You, Sherikov, are talking rubbish, and what is particularly tiresome is that you do so with complete assurance, as though what you say admitted no argument. Of course I don't grudge the vodka, all the more as it belongs to Philip Filipovich. Simply, it's bad for you. That's in the first place, and, in the second, your behavior leaves much to be desired even without vodka. Bormental pointed to the strips glued over the glass of the sideboard. Zina, give me some more fish, please, pronounced the professor. Sherikov, in the meantime, had stretched out for the decanter and, casting a sidelong look at Bormental, had poured himself a small glass. And then you should offer it to other people, said Bormental. And in this order. First Philip Filipovich, then me, then yourself. Sherikov's mouth curved into a scarcely distinguishable satirical smile, and he poured out a glass of vodka all round. Everything here's like on parade, he said, the napkin here, the tie there, and, excuse me, and, please merci, and nothing natural. You torment yourselves as though you were still under the Tsar. Sherikov did not volunteer any answer to Philip Filipovich, but raised his glass and pronounced. Well, I wish you all, and the same to you, responded Bormental, not without irony. Sherikov downed the content of his glass, made a face, raised a piece of bread to his nose, sniffed it, then swallowed it, during which procedure his eyes filled with tears. An old hand, remarked Philip Filipovich, apropos of nothing in particular, as if in a deep reverie. Bormental glanced at him in surprise. I beg your pardon, an old hand, repeated Philip Filipovich, and shook his head bitterly. There's nothing to be done about it. Klim. Bormental's eyes met Philip Filipovich's with acute interest. You think, Philip Filipovich? I don't think. I am quite convinced. Surely, began Bormental and checked himself, glancing at Sherikov, who was frowning suspiciously. Spader, said Philip Filipovich quietly in German. Gut, replied the assistant. Zina brought in the turkey. Bormental poured Philip Filipovich some red wine and offered it to Sherikov. I don't want that. I'd rather have another vodka. His face had become shiny, there was sweat on his forehead and he seemed in better spirits. Even Philip Filipovich was rather more kindly disposed after the wine. His eyes cleared, he looked upon Sherikov, whose black head sat squatly on the napkin like a fly in sour cream, with more benevolence. Bormental, however, having taken refreshment, felt a desire for action. Well now, what shall you and I do this evening? He asked Sherikov. The latter blinked and said, Go to the circus, I like that best. Every day to the circus, remarked Philip Filipovich good-naturedly. That must be rather boring, I should think. In your place I would go to the theater at least once. I won't go to the theater, snarled Sherikov with animosity and made the sign of the cross over his mouth. Belching at table spoils other people's appetite, remarked Bormental automatically. But forgive me, why, in fact, do you dislike the theater? Sherikov put his empty vodka glass to his eye as though it were a pair of binoculars, thought and pouted. Well, it's all a lot of playing the fool talk, pure counter-revolution. Philip Filipovich tilted back his Gothic chair and laughed so much that the golden stockade in his mouth gleamed and sparkled. Bormental only shook his head. You really are. Zina, called Philip Filipovich anxiously. Clear away the vodka, child. We won't be needing it anymore. What are you reading? Before his mind's eye arose a picture of a desert island, a palm tree, a man in skins and a cap. You should try Robinson, that what do they call it, correspondence between Engels and what's the blighter's name, Kautsky. Bormental's fork stopped halfway to his mouth with a piece of white meat on the end of it. Philip Filipovich spilt some wine. Sherikov, meanwhile, took advantage of the situation to knock back his vodka. Philip Filipovich, elbows on table, gazed at Sherikov attentively and asked, I would be interested to hear what you have to say about what you have read. Sherikov shrugged his shoulders. I disagree. With whom? With Engels or with Kautsky? With both. This is quite remarkable, by God. Everyone who says that another, and what would you suggest for your part? What's the use of suggesting? As it is, they write and they write Congress, various Germans fills your head with a lot of wind. The thing to do is to take everything, then divide it equally. That's just what I thought, exclaimed Philip Filipovich, slapping the table with the palm of his hand. That's just what I supposed. How would you set about it? Asked Bormental, intrigued. How I'd set about it? Sherikov was eager to talk after the vodka. That's easy. What you've got now, for instance. One person has settled into 7 rooms and has 40 pairs of trousers, while another is a homeless tramp looking for his food in rubbish bins. When you speak of 7 rooms you are, of course, referring to me. Philip Filipovich narrowed his eyes proudly. Sherikov drew his head in between his shoulders and said nothing. Well, that's fine then, I'm not against a fair division. How many people did you turn away yesterday, doctor? 39, answered Bormental promptly. 390 rubles. Well, if the 3 men take the sin on themselves, we won't count the ladies. Zina and Darya Petrovna, that will be 130 rubles from you, Sherikov. Be so good as to make your contribution. That's a fast one, replied Sherikov, taking fright. What's that for? For the tap and for the cat, snapped Philip Filipovich, emerging from his state of ironic detachment. Philip Filipovich, exclaimed Bormental anxiously. Wait. For the chaos you created and for making it impossible for me to attend to my reception. It is intolerable. A human being goes leaping round the flat like something just down from the trees, tearing out taps. Who killed Madame Polasuker's cat? Who and— But she slapped my face, squealed Sherikov. My face isn't public property. Because you had pinched her bosom, cried Bormantel, upsetting his glass. You stand on the lowest rung of evolution. Philip Filipovich outshouted him. You are a being just beginning to take form, still weak from the intellectual point of view. All your actions are purely bestial, and in the presence of two people with university education you dare to let yourself go in the most unforgivable manner and offer advice of a positively cosmic nature with positively cosmic stupidity about how everything should be divided up, and at the same time you do things like eating the tooth powder the day before yesterday. Bormantel backed him up. So, sir, I am forced to rub your nose, and why? By the way, have you rubbed the zinc ointment off it? I am forced to rub your nose in the fact that your business is to keep quiet and listen to what you're told, to learn and try to become a reasonably acceptable member of the community. Besides which, what scoundrel was it who gave you that book? Everyone's a scoundrel to you, answered Sherikov nervously, confounded by the attack from both flanks. I can guess, exclaimed Philip Filipovich, red with anger. Well, and what if he did? Well, Schwander gave it to me. He's not a scoundrel, it's to develop my mind. I can see how it's been developing after Kautsky. Philip Filipovich cried shrilly, turning yellow. At this point he furiously pressed the bell on the wall. What happened today is the best possible proof of that. Zina! Zina! Called Bormantel. Zina! Yelled the frightened Sherikov. Zina came running pale-faced. Zina, in the reception room. There is it in the reception room. In the reception room, answered Sherikov meekly. Green as venom. A green book, now you'll go and burn it. Sherikov exclaimed in despair. It's public property, from the library. The correspondence, it's called, between what's his name Engels and that other devil, into the fire with it. Zina sped away. I would hang that Schwander from the first dry branch, I give you my word, cried Philip Filipovich, attacking the wing of his turkey. The poisonous fellow sits in the house like a boil. Quite apart from the fact that he writes all kinds of libelous gossip for the newspapers. Sherik began to steal the odd malicious, ironic glances at the professor. Philip Filipovich glanced across at him in his turn and fell silent. Oh. The meal was finished in silence. Sherikov produced a squashed cigarette from his pocket and began puffing smoke. Having finished his coffee, Philip Filipovich looked at his watch, pressed the repeater, and it tenderly chimed 8:15. Philip Filipovich tilted back his Gothic chair and reached for the newspaper on the side table. Doctor, I beg you, go to the circus with him. Only check carefully through the program and make sure there are no cats. How can they let such trash into a circus? Remarked Sherikov darkly, shaking his head. They let in all sorts, retorted Philip Filipovich ambiguously. What's on there tonight? Solomonsky has 4 things called Usum's 8 and a spinning man, Bormantel began to read out. What are Usums? Inquired Philip Filipovich suspiciously. Goodness knows. I've never met the word before. In that case you'd better look through the Nikitins. One must have things clear. The Nikitins have elephants and the ultimate in human dexterity. Right. What have you to say to elephants, dear Sherikov? Philip Filipovich asked Sherikov mistrustfully. He took offense. You may think I don't understand, but I do, Sherikov replied. Cats are different. Elephants are useful animals. Well then, that's settled. If they are useful, then go and take a look at them. Do as Ivan Arnoldovich tells you. And don't get talking with strangers in the buffet. Ivan Arnoldovich, please do not treat Sherikov to beer. 10 minutes later Ivan Arnoldovich and Sherikov, dressed in a cap with a duckbill peak and a cloth coat with raised collar, left for the circus. In the flat there was silence. Philip Filipovich was in his study. He lit the lamp under the heavy green shade, from which it immediately became very peaceful in the huge study, and began to pace the room. The end of his cigar glowed long and hot with a pale green fire. The professor's hands were thrust deep into his trouser pockets and unhappy thoughts tormented his learned brow with the smoothly combed sparse hair. He made little chuckling sounds, singing between his teeth to the sacred shores of the Nile and muttering something. Finally, he laid the cigar across the ashtray, went to a cupboard entirely made of glass and lit the whole study with 3 extremely powerful projector lamps on the ceiling. From the cupboard, from the third glass shelf, Philip Filipovich pulled out a narrow jar and began to examine it, frowning in the light of the lamps. In the transparent, viscose liquid swam suspended, not touching the bottom, a small white lump, extracted from the depth of Sherik's brain. Shrugging his shoulders, his lips twisted in an ironic smile, Philip Filipovich devoured it with his eyes, as though he wanted to discover from the unsinkable white lump the mainspring of the cupboard, locked it with a key, slipped the key into his waistcoat pocket and flung himself, hunching his shoulders and thrusting his hands deep into the pockets of his jacket, onto the leather sofa. For a long time he puffed away at his second cigar, chewing the end quite to pieces, and finally, in total solitude, glowing green like a silver-haired Faust, he exclaimed, "As God is my witness, I believe I'll take the risk." To that, no one made any reply. All sound ceased in the flat. In Obukov Alley, as everyone knows, all traffic falls silent after 11 o'clock. Very occasionally came the sound of the distant footsteps of some belated passerby. They pattered past somewhere behind the thick curtains and died away. In the study, Philip Filipovich's repeater watch chimed softly beneath his finger from the small pocket. The professor impatiently awaited the return of Dr. Bormental and Sherikov. 8. There is no telling precisely what risk Philip Filipovich had decided to take. He took no further action for the rest of the week, and, possibly as a result of this passivity, life in the flat became excessively eventful. About 6 days after the business with the water and the cat, the young man who had turned out to be a woman from the House Committee came to see Sherikov and presented him with his documents. Sherikov promptly pocketed them and immediately thereafter called Drive. Bormental. Bormental. Oh, no, you don't. Please address me by my name and patronymic, replied Bormental, his face changing. It must be said that, in the course of the 6 days that had elapsed, the surgeon had quarreled at least 8 times with his protégé. The atmosphere in the Obukov rooms was tense. In that case you call me by my name and patronymic, replied Sherikov with every justification. No, roared Philip Filipovich from the doorway. I cannot have you called by a name and patronymic like that in my flat. If you wish that we should address you with less familiarity and stop calling you Sherikov, we will call you Mr. Sherikov. I'm no Mr. All the misters are in Paris. Sherikov barked. Schwander's work, cried Philip Filipovich. All right then, I'll get even with that villain. There will be no one but misters and masters in my flat for as long as I live here. If not, either I shall leave this place, or you will, and most probably it will be you. I shall put a notice in the newspaper today, and I am sure we shall soon find a room for you. I'm not such a fool as to leave this place, Sherikov answered quite distinctly. What? Philip Filipovich gasped, and his face changed to such a degree that Bormental flew to his side and tenderly and anxiously took him by the sleeve. None of your cheek now, Monsieur Sherikov. Bormental, green, one yellow and one white, and, poking his fingers at them, said, "There you are. I am a member of the accommodation cooperative, and I have the indisputable right to 13 square yards of space in flat number 5, the tenant responsible for which is Professor Preobrazhensky." Sherikov thought for a moment and added a phrase which Bormental's mind mechanically registered as new. "With your kind permission." Philip Filipovich caught his lip in his teeth and uncautiously remarked through it, "I swear I'll shoot that Schwander before I've finished with him." Sherikov was onto the words most attentively, and it was clear from his eyes that they had made a sharp impact. "Philip Filipovich," Vorsiktig Bormental began warningly. "Well, but you know such a dirty trick," cried Philip Filipovich. "You bear in mind, Sherikov mister, that if you permit yourself one more impertinence, I shall give you no more dinners or any other food in my house. 13 square yards. That is charming, but after all there is nothing in that frog-colored paper that obliges me to feed you." Here Sharikov took fright and his mouth fell open. I can't do without proper nourishment, he mumbled. Where'll I get my grub? In that case behave yourself. Chorused the two Aesculapians in one voice. Sharikov became significantly quieter and on that particular day did no further harm to anyone other than himself. Making full use of the short space of time Bormental had to leave the house, he got hold of his razor and cut open his own cheekbone so effectively that Philip Filipovich and Dr. Bormental had to sew him up, after which Sharikov continued to howl and weep for a long time. The following night in the green semi-darkness of the study two men were sitting. Philip Filipovich and his faithful, devoted assistant Bormental. Everyone in the house was asleep. Philip Filipovich was in his azure dressing gown and red slippers, Bormental in his shirt sleeves and blue braces. On the round table between the doctors next to a plump album stood a bottle of cognac, a saucer with slices of lemon and a cigar box. The scholars, having filled the room with smoke, were hotly discussing the latest event. That evening Sharikov had appropriated two 10-ruble notes that had been lying under a paper weight, disappeared from the flat and returned late and stone drunk. But this was not all. With him had appeared two persons unknown who had made an unseemly din on the front stairs and declared their intention of spending the night as Sharikov's guests. The aforesaid persons had only taken their departure after Fyodor, who had been present at the spectacle in a light autumn coat thrown over his underwear, had rung up the 45th Department of the militia. The two persons took their departure instantly, as soon as Fyodor had put down the telephone. After they had gone it was discovered that the malachite ashtray from the shelf beneath the mirror in the hall had vanished, no one knew where, and likewise Philip Filipovich's beaver hat and his cane, on which was inscribed in flowing gold letters. To dear and respected Philip Filipovich from his grateful graduates on the day and then, in Roman figures, the number 25. Who are they? Philip Filipovich advanced on Sharikov with clenched fists. Swaying and shrinking back amongst the fur coats, Sharikov declared that the persons were unknown to him, that they were not just any old sons of bitches, but good people. The most extraordinary thing is that they were both drunk. How did they manage it? Asked Philip Filipovich in amazement, gazing at the place on the rack where the souvenir of the anniversary had once stood. Professionals, explained Fyodor, heading back to bed with a ruble in his pocket. Sharikov categorically denied taking the two 10-ruble notes and in doing so dropped dark hints as to the fact that he was not the only one in the flat. Aha, then possibly it was Dr. Bormental who pinched the notes, inquired Philip Filipovich in a quiet voice tinged with menace. Sharikov rocked on his feet, opened totally glazed eyes and suggested. Perhaps that slut Zina took them. What's that? Screamed Zina, materializing in the doorway like an apparition, and clasping her unbuttoned blouse to her breast with the palm of her hand. How could he? Philip Filipovich's neck was suffused with crimson. Calm yourself, Zina dear, he pronounced, holding out his hand to her. Don't worry, we will deal with this. Zina promptly burst into tears, her mouth going right down at the corners, and the little hand jumping on her collarbone. There, Zina, you should be ashamed of yourself. Who could possibly think such a thing? Fie, what a disgrace. Bormental broke out, at a loss. Well, Zina, you are a fool, God forgive me, Philip Filipovich began saying. But at that moment Zina's lament stopped of its own accord and they all fell silent. Sharikov was clearly unwell. Knocking his head against the wall he emitted a sound, something between E and EH. Something like EHEEH. His face turned pale, and his jaw began to work in spasms. A bucket, bring the scoundrel the bucket from the consulting room. And they all rushed round ministering to Sharikov in his sickness. When he was led off to bed, staggering along, supported by Bormental, he cursed very tenderly and melodiously, struggling to get his tongue round the ugly words. All this had happened in the small hours at about 1 o'clock and now it was around 3, but the two in the study were still wide awake, stimulated by the cognac and lemon. They had so filled the room with smoke that it rose and fell in slow layers, not even wavering. Dr. Bormental, pale-faced, the light of purpose in his eyes, raised his wasp-waisted glass. "Philip Filipovich," he exclaimed warmly. "I shall never forget how I first came to make your acquaintance as a half-starved student and how you gave me a place at the faculty. Believe me, Philip Filipovich, you are much more to me than a professor, a teacher. My respect for you is unbounded. Permit me to embrace you, dear Philip Filipovich." "Yes, my dear fellow," Philip Filipovich murmured in embarrassment and rose to meet him. Bormental embraced him and planted a kiss on the downy mustaches, now thoroughly impregnated with cigar smoke. "Honestly, Philip Philly, so touched, so touched." "Thank you," said Philip Filipovich. "Dear boy, I shout at you sometimes during operations. You must forgive an old man's peppery nature. In fact, I am very lonely. You see, from Seville to Granada." "Philip Filipovich, you ought to be ashamed of yourself," cried out the fiery Bormental. "If you don't want to offend me, never say such things to me again." "Well, thank you to the sacred shores of the Nile. Thank you, and I have come to love you as a most capable doctor." "Philip Filipovich, let me tell you," exclaimed Bormental with passion, leapt up from his chair and tightly closed the door leading into the corridor, then, having returned to his place, continued in a whisper. "That is the only way out. It is not for me, of course, give you advice, Philip Filipovich, but just take a look at yourself. You are completely exhausted. You can't continue to work in these circumstances." "Quite impossible," admitted Philip Filipovich with a sigh. "Well, and that is unthinkable," whispered Bormental. "Last time you said you were afraid for my sake, and I was so touched. If only you knew how touched, dear professor. But I am not a child, after all, and I am well aware what terrible consequences there could be. But it is my firm opinion that there is no other way out." Philip Filipovich rose, made a gesture of rejection and exclaimed, "Do not tempt me, do not even talk about it." The professor took a turn about the room, emitting waves of smoke. "I won't even listen. You must understand what would happen if we were discovered. Neither you nor I, given our social origins, will have the least chance of getting away with it, in spite of the fact that we should be first offenders. At least, I suppose your origins are not of the right sort, are they, dear boy?" "What a hope! My father was a police investigator in Vilnius," replied Bormental bitterly, finishing off his cognac. "Well, there you are then. What more could you ask? That is a bad heredity. Hard to imagine anything more damaging. By the way, though, I'm wrong, mine is worse still. My father was a cathedral archpriest. Merci. From Seville to Granada in the still of the night, there it is, damn it. Philip Filipovich, you are a great man, world famous, and just because of some son of a bitch, if you'll excuse the expression, surely they can't touch you. What are you saying?" "All the more reason not to do it," retorted Philip Filipovich thoughtfully, pausing and looking round at the glass cupboard. "But why?" "Because you are not world famous." "Well, of course. There you are, you see. And to, hi-ho, Philip Filipovich," sighed Bormental sadly. "That means you will wait until we manage to make a real human being out of this hooligan. Is that it?" Philip Filipovich stopped him with a gesture, poured himself some cognac, sipped, sucked a section of lemon and said, "Ivan Arnoldovich, I would like your opinion. Do I understand anything in the anatomy and physiology of, let us say, the hypophysis of the human brain? What do you think?" "Philip Filipovich, how could you ask?" replied Bormental ardently, throwing out his hands. "All right then. Without false modesty, I also consider that I am not the last specialist in that field here in Moscow. And I consider that you are the first. Not only in Moscow but in London or Oxford." Bormental broke in with ardor. "Well, all right, let us assume that is so. Well then, future Professor Bormental, that is something no one could perform successfully. And there's an end to it. It's not worth considering. You can quote me," Preobrazhensky said. "Finita. Klim." Philip Filipovich cried out solemnly, and the cupboard answered him with a clink. "Klim," he repeated. There it is, Vormental, you are the first follower of my school and, apart from that, as I realized today, you are my friend. And so I will tell you in secret and as a friend. Of course, I know that you won't hold me up to ridicule. That Preobrazhensky, the old donkey, went into that operation as irresponsibly as a third-year student. It's true we made a discovery and you yourself are aware of what significance. Here Philip Filipovich made a tragic gesture with both hands towards the window curtain as if embracing the whole of Moscow. But just keep in mind, Ivan Arnoldovich, that the only result of this discovery will be that we shall all be fed up with this Sherikov to hear. Preobrazhensky slapped his own full, apoplectic neck. You may rest assured of that. If only someone, continued Philip Filipovich in an ecstasy of self-reproach, would fling me down on the floor here and flog me, I'd pay him 50 rubles, I swear I could. From Seville to Granada the devil take me, I sat there for 5 years digging the pituitaries out of brains. You know how much work I got through. I can hardly believe it myself. And now the question arises. Why? In order one fine day to transform a most likable dog into such a nasty piece of work it makes the hair stand on end. Absolutely disgusting. I quite agree with you. There you see, doctor, what happens when a scholar, instead of advancing parallel to and feeling his way in step with nature, decides to force a question and raise the curtain. Out pops a Sherikov and there you are, like him or lump him. Philip Filipovich, and if it had been Spinoza's brain. Yes. Philip Filipovich snapped. Yes. If only the poor unfortunate dog doesn't die under the knife, and you've seen what kind of an operation it is. In a word, I, Philip Preobrazhensky, have never done anything more difficult in my life. It's possible to take the hypothesis of a Spinoza or any other creature you care to name and make a dog into something extremely high-standing. But why the hell? That's the question. Explain to me, please, why we should set about manufacturing artificial Spinozas, when any simple peasant woman can give birth to one at the drop of a hat. After all, Madame Lomonosova bore that famous son of hers in Kolmogorye. 9. Doctor, humanity takes care of all that for us in her own good time and according to the order of evolution, and by distinguishing from the mass of the low and the lowly, she creates a few dozen exceptional geniuses to grace this earth of ours. Now you see, doctor, why I faulted your conclusions on the case history of Sherek. My discovery, devil take it and swallow it whole, is of as much use as a sick headache. Don't argue with me, Ivan Arnoldovich. I've understood it all now. I never talk hot air, you know that. Theoretically it's interesting. All right, then. Physiologists will be in ecstasy. Moscow will go crazy but, practically speaking, what will happen? Who do you see before you now? Preobrazhensky pointed in the direction of the consulting room, where Sherikov was taking his rest. An exceptionally nasty bit of work. But who is he? Klim! Cried the professor. Klim Chuganov. Vormental's mouth fell open. That's who he is. 2 criminal convictions, alcoholism, share out everything, the fur hat and 2 10-ruble notes gone. At this point Philip Filipovich remembered the anniversary cane and turned crimson. A lewd fellow and a swine, well, I'll find that cane. In a word, the hypothesis is a closed chamber which contains the blueprint for the individual human personality. The individual personality. From Seville to Granada Philip Filipovich cried out, his eyes flashing fiercely, and not just general human traits. It is a miniature of the brain itself. And I have no use for it whatsoever, the devil take it. I was on the lookout for something absolutely different, for eugenics, for a way to improve human nature. And then I got onto rejuvenation. Surely you don't think that I just do these operations for money. I am a scholar, after all. You are a great scholar, and that's the truth, uttered Vormental, sipping at his cognac. His eyes were bloodshot. I wanted to make a small experiment after I first obtained the extraction of the sexual hormone from the hypophysis 2 years ago. And what happened instead of that? Oh, my God. These hormones in the hypophysis. Oh Lord Doctor, all I see before me is dull despair and, I must confess, I have lost my way. Bormantel suddenly rolled up his sleeves and pronounced, squinting down his nose. Very well, then, dear teacher, if you don't want to, I will feed him arsenic myself at my own risk. I don't care if Papa was a police investigator. After all, in the final analysis it is your own experimental creature. Philip Filipovich had lost his fire, softened up, fallen back in the armchair, and said, "No, I can't allow you to do that, dear boy. I am 60 years old and can give you some advice. Never commit a crime against anybody whatsoever. That's how you'll grow old with clean hands. But Philip Filipovich, for goodness sake. If that Schwander gets working on him again, what will become of him? My God, I'm only just beginning to realize the potential. That Sherikov represents a greater threat to him than to me. At this stage he'll make every effort to sick him onto me, not realizing that, if someone in their turn decides to sick Sherikov onto Schwander, there'll be nothing left of him but a few flying feathers. Yes indeed. The cats alone are proof enough of that. A man with the heart of a dog. Ah no, no, Philip Filipovich said slowly in answer. You, doctor, are making a very great mistake. Pray do not libel the dog. The cats are temporary, that is just a matter of discipline in 2 or 3 weeks. I assure you, in a month or 2 he will have stopped chasing them. And why not now? Elementary, Ivan Arnoldovich, how can you ask? The hypothesis is not suspended in thin air. It is attached to the brain of a dog, after all. Give it time to adapt. At this stage Sherikov is exhibiting only residuary canine behavioral traits and, understand this, chasing cats is quite the best thing he does. You have to realize that the whole horror of the thing is that he already has not the heart of a dog but the heart of a man. And one of the most rotten in nature. Bormantel, worked up to the last degree, clenched his strong thin hands into fists, twitched his shoulders and announced firmly. That's it. I'll kill him. I forbid it. Categorically replied Philip Filipovich. But for heaven's sake, Philip Filipovich suddenly raised his finger and listened tensely. Just a moment. I thought I heard footsteps. Both listened but all was silent in the corridor. Must have imagined it, pronounced Philip Filipovich and went off into a tirade in German, punctuated by one Russian word, Yugolovshchina, criminal offense, pronounced more than once. Just a moment. It was Bormantel this time, who gave the alert and moved towards the door. This time the steps were clearly to be heard approaching the study. Apart from this, there was a voice, muttering something. Bormantel flung open the door and sprang back in amazement. Thunderstruck, Philip Filipovich froze in his armchair. In the lighted quadrangle of the corridor, Darya Petrovna stood before them clad only in her nightslip, her face flaming and militant. Both the doctor and the professor were blinded by the abundance of her mighty and, as it seemed to them both from their first fright, totally naked body. In her powerful arms Darya Petrovna was dragging something, and that something was struggling and sitting on its rump and trying to dig its small legs covered with down into the parquet. The something, of course, turned out to be Sherikov, totally confused, still rather drunk, unkempt and dressed only in his nightshirt. Darya Petrovna, grandiose and naked, shook Sherikov like a sack of potatoes and pronounced the following words. Take a good look at him, Professor, sir, at our visitor. Teleg squealed, covered her breasts with her arms and ran. Darya Petrovna, pardon us, for goodness sake, the blushing Philip Filipovich called after her, coming to himself. Bormantel rolled up his shirt sleeves and advanced on Sherikov. Philip Filipovich took one look at his eyes and was horrified by what he saw there. Doctor, what are you doing? I forbid. Bormantel took Sherikov by the collar and shook him so violently that the shirt front split. Philip Filipovich waded in to separate them and began to extract skinny little Sherikov from those strong surgeons' hands. You have no right to hit me, shouted the half-strangled Sherikov, sitting down and sobering up rapidly. Doctor, thundered Philip Filipovich. Bormantel came to himself somewhat and let go of Sherikov. All right then, hissed Bormantel, we'll wait till morning. I'll deal with him when he's sober. He then tucked Sharikov under one arm and hauled him off to the consulting room to sleep. Sharikov made some attempt to resist, but his legs would not obey him. Philip Filipovich stood legs astride so that his azure dressing gown fell open, raised hands and eyes to the ceiling light in the corridor and remarked, Well, 9. Dr. Bormental did not deal with Sharikov next morning as promised for the simple reason that Polygrafovich had vanished from the house. Bormental was in a fury of despair, reproaching himself for having been ass enough not to hide the key of the front door, yelling that it was unforgivable, and concluding with the wish that Sharikov would run under a bus. Philip Filipovich sat in his study running his fingers through his hair and saying, I can well imagine what's going on out there, I can well imagine. From Seville to Granada, oh my God. He may still be with the House Committee. Bormental ran off like one possessed. In the House Committee he had a stand-up row with the chairman Schwander till the latter, enraged, sat down and wrote a notice to the People's Court of the Komovniki district, shouting that he was not the keeper of Professor Preobrazhensky's protégé, all the more so as that protégé Polygraf had only yesterday shown himself to be a real cad, having taken 7 rubles from the House Committee supposedly in order to buy textbooks from the cooperative. Fyodor was paid 3 rubles to search the whole house from top to bottom, but nowhere was Sharikov to be found. The only thing that did come to light was that Polygraf had made from the sideboard, Dr. Bormental's gloves and all his own documents. Darya Petrovna and Zina made no attempt to disguise their demonstrative delight and hope that Sharikov would never return. The day before Sharikov had borrowed 3 rubles and 50 kopecks from Darya Petrovna. Serve you all right, growled Philip Filipovich, shaking his fists. The telephone rang all that day, and all the next. The doctors received a record number of patients, and on the 3rd day in the study they faced up to the question of the necessity of informing the militia about a missing person, whose duty it was to search out Sharikov in the deep waters of the Moscow underworld. No sooner had the word militia been pronounced than the blessed quiet of Obukov Alley was broken by the growl of a van and the windows of the house shook. After this there was a confident ring, and in came Polygrafovich with an air of exceptional dignity, quietly took off his cap, hung his coat on a peg and appeared in a new hypostasis. He was wearing a second-hand leather jacket, rubbed leather trousers and high English boots laced up to the knee. An incredibly powerful aroma of cats immediately billowed out to fill the whole hall. Preobrazhensky and Bormental, as if on command, folded their arms on their chests, planted themselves in the doorways and waited for Polygrafovich to explain himself. He smoothed down his wiry hair, gave a little cough and looked round in such a way that it became clear that he wished to hide a certain embarrassment beneath an air of jaunty insouciance. I, Philip Filipovich, he began at last, have taken up an official post. Both doctors uttered an indeterminate strangled sound in their throats and moved. Preobrazhensky, the first to come to himself, held out his hand and said, Give me the paper. On it was printed, The presenter of this, Comrade Polygrafovich Sharikov, is truly employed as head of the sub-department for the control of stray animals, cats, etc. in the precincts of the city of Moscow in the Department of M.K.K.H. Moscow Communal Welfare. Ed. So, pronounced Philip Filipovich glumly. Who got you the job? But I suppose I can guess. Yes, of course, Schwander, replied Sharikov. May I ask you, how comes it that you smell so singularly repulsive? Sharikov sniffed at his jacket with some anxiety. Well, what can you do about it? It does smell, as everyone knows of the job. Yesterday we were strangling cats, strangling 'em one after another. Philip Filipovich shuddered and glanced at Bormental. The latter's eyes were reminiscent of two black gun muzzles, focused point blank on Sharikov. Without any preliminaries he moved in on Sharikov and with easy confidence seized him by the throat. Help! Squealed Sharikov, turning pale. Doctor, I shall not permit myself anything unethical, Philip Filipovich, don't worry, replied Bormental grimly and yelled. Zina and Darya Petrovna both appeared in the hall. Now repeat, said Bormental, and very slightly increased the pressure on Sherikov's throat, pushing back his neck against a fur coat. All right, I'll say it, the totally defeated Sherikov responded in hoarse tones, suddenly gasped for air, jerked away and tried to shout for help again, only the shout did not come out and his head disappeared completely into the fur. Doctor, I implore you. Sherikov nodded his head slightly as a sign that he submitted and would repeat. Forgive me, much respected Darya Petrovna and Zinaida Prokofyevna, whispered the scared Zina. Oof, Prokofyevna, said Sherikov, hoarse-voiced, that I permitted myself a revolting prank at night in a drunken state, and I will never do it again. Let him go, Ivan Arnoldovich, begged both the women simultaneously. You'll strangle him. Bormental let go of Sherikov and said. The van is waiting for you. No, replied Polygraph respectfully. It just brought me home. Zina, tell the van it can go. Now, I want you to bear in mind the following. You have returned to Philip Filipovich's flat. Where else should I go? Replied Sherikov timidly, his eyes wandering. Excellent. You will be good, quiet and humble. Otherwise, you will have me to reckon with. Do you understand? I understand, said Sherikov. Philip Filipovich throughout this violent action perpetrated against Sherikov had remained silent. He had shrunk pitiably against the lintel and was biting his nails, his eyes fixed on the parquet floor. Then he suddenly raised them to Sherikov and asked dully, automatically. What do you do with them, with the dead cats? They'll go for coats, replied Sherikov. They make squirrels out of them and sell them on workers' credit schemes. 10 After this there was calm and quiet in the flat, and it lasted for 2 days and 2 nights. Polygrafovich left in the morning in his van, reappeared in the evening, and quietly ate his dinner in the company of Philip Filipovich and Bormental. In spite of the fact that Bormental and Sherikov slept in the same room, the reception room, they were not on speaking terms, so it was Bormental who became really uncomfortable. 2 days later a thin young girl in cream-colored stockings with heavily made-up eyes appeared and was clearly overwhelmed at the sight of the splendid flat. In her shabby little coat she followed Sherikov into the hall and bumped into the professor. Taken aback, he stopped, narrowed his eyes and said, May I inquire? We are going to get married. This is our typist. May I ask you to step into my study for a moment? I'll come with her, Sherikov said quickly and suspiciously. At this moment Bormental surfaced as if from under the earth. I beg your pardon, he said. The professor will have a word with the lady, and you and I will remain here. Not if I can help it, Sherikov retorted furiously, trying to follow Philip Filipovich and the desperately embarrassed girl. Forgive me, no, Bormental took Sherikov by the wrist and led him into the consulting room. For 5 minutes there was no sound from the study, and then suddenly they could hear the muffled sobbing of the girl. Philip Filipovich stood by the table and the girl wept into a crumpled lace handkerchief. He said, the scoundrel, that he'd been wounded in battle, the girl sobbed. He's lying, replied Philip Filipovich inexorably. He shook his head and went on. I am sincerely sorry for you, but you know you should not go off with the first man you meet just because he has a steady job. My child, it is not right. There. He opened a drawer of his writing table and took out 3 30-ruble notes. I'll poison myself, wept the girl. There's salt meat at the canteen every day, and he threatens, says he's a Red Commander, says he'll take me to live in a luxurious flat, pineapples every day. I've a kind psyche, he says, it's only cats I hate. He took a ring from me as a keepsake. Well, a kind psyche. From Seville to Granada, muttered Philip Filipovich. It will pass, you just have to bear the pain a little time. You are still so young, surely not under that same gateway. Now, take the money when it's offered to you as a loan, Philip Filipovich concluded gruffly. After this the door was solemnly opened and Bormental, at the invitation of Philip Filipovich, led in Sherikov. He was looking particularly shifty-eyed and his hair stood on end like a brush. Scoundrel, the girl scolded, her tear-reddened mascara-stained eyes and blotchily powdered nose flashing. "Why have you a scar on your forehead? Be so good as to explain to this lady," asked Philip Filipovich insinuatingly. Sherikov went the whole hog. "I was wounded at the Kolchak front," he barked. The girl rose to her feet and went out, crying bitterly. "Stop," Philip Filipovich called after her. "Wait. The ring, please," he said, turning to Sherikov. Obediently, Sherikov took from his finger a hollow ring with an emerald. "Right, then," he said with "What's her name?" Bormental asked him. "Her name," he roared and suddenly became wild and terrifying. "Vasnetsova," replied Sherikov, looking round desperately for some line of retreat. "Every day," said Bormental, holding the lapel of Sherikov's jacket, "I shall myself, personally, inquire at pest control whether or not citizen Vasnetsova has been made redundant. And if you so much as if I find out that she has been made redundant, I will shoot you with my own hands. Be careful, Sherikov. I am warning you in clear Russian." Sherikov kept his eyes fixed firmly on Bormental's nose. "I know where to lay hands on revolvers myself," muttered Sherikov, though in a very flat voice, then, with a sudden cunning twist, broke free and dived for the door. "Take care," Bormental's shout echoed after him. The night and half the following day hung heavy as a cloud before the storm. There was a hush. Everyone was silent. But on the following day, when Polygrafovich, who was troubled by a nagging presentiment from morning, had left gloomily with the van for his place of work, Professor Preobrazhensky received at a most unusual hour one of his ex-patients, a stout, tall man in military uniform. He had been most insistent on obtaining an appointment and had actually succeeded doing so. On entering the study, he politely clicked his heels before the professor. "Are you having pain again, dear sir?" asked the haggard Philip Filipovich. "Sit down, please. Merci." "No, professor," replied the guest, putting his hat down on the corner of the table. "I owe you a great debt, but I came for another reason, Philip Filipovich, full of respect as I am to warn you. It's clearly nonsense. Simply he's a nasty bit of work." The patient fumbled about in his briefcase and produced a paper. "It's a good thing the report came straight to me." Philip Filipovich saddled his nose with his pince-nez, which he put on over his glasses, and began to read. He took his time, mumbling to himself, the expression of his face changing from one moment to the next. Likewise threatening to kill the chairman of the House Committee, Comrade Schwander, from which it is clear that he is in possession of a gun. And he pronounces counter-revolutionary speeches and even orders his social servant Zinaida Prokofyevna Bunina to burn Engels in the stove, which proves him a typical Menshevik, together with his assistant Bormental, Ivan Arnoldovich, who secretly and without registration lives in his flat. Signature of the head of the sub-department of pest control P. Sherikov, witnessed by the chairman of the House Committee Schwander and the secretary Pestrukin. "May I keep this?" inquired Philip Filipovich, going all blotchy. "Or, forgive me, do you need it in furtherance of the process of law?" "I beg your pardon, professor." The patient was deeply insulted and his nostrils dilated. "You really do hold us in great contempt, it seems." And at this point he began to swell like a turkey cock. "Well then, excuse me, dear sir, pray excuse me," muttered Philip Filipovich. "Forgive me, I really had no intention of insulting you. My dear fellow, don't be angry with me, he's got on my nerves to such an extent." "I should rather think he has." The patient was entirely mollified. "But what trash. It would be interesting to take a look at him. Moscow is buzzing with all sorts of legends about you." Philip Filipovich merely made a despairing gesture. At this point the guest noticed that the professor had developed a stoop and even appeared to have gone somewhat grayer lately. The crime had ripened and now, as so often happens, fell like a stone. Polygrafovich returned that evening in the van, troubled by some indefinable presentiment of disaster which simply would not go away. Philip Filipovich's voice invited him into the consulting room. Surprised, Sherikov went and, with a vague stirring of fear, looked down the barrel of Bormentel's face and then at Philip Filipovich. The assistant looked like thunder and his left hand with the cigarette trembled slightly on the arm of the gynecological chair. Philip Filipovich with most ominous calm said, "Take your things this instant. Trousers, coat, everything you need, and get out of this flat." "What the?" Sharikov was sincerely taken aback. "Out of the flat. Today," Philip Filipovich repeated monotonously, examining his nails through narrowed eyes. Some evil spirit took possession of Polygrafovich. Evidently death was already awaiting him and doom stood at his elbow. He cast himself into the embrace of the inevitable and snapped angrily and abruptly. "What do you think you're trying to do? Surely you don't think I don't know where to go to get you lot sorted out. I've a right to my 13 square yards here, and here I'll stay. Get out of this flat," whispered Philip Filipovich on a note of intimate warning. Sharikov invited his own death. He raised his left hand and, with scratched and bitten fingers which smelt unbearably of cats, made a vulgar gesture of defiance. Then, with his right hand, pulled a revolver from his pocket on the dangerous Bormentel. Bormentel's cigarette fell like a shooting star and a few seconds later Philip Filipovich, leaping over the broken glass, was dithering in horror between the cupboard and the couch. On the couch, flat on his back and struggling for breath, lay the head of the sub-department of pest control, and on his chest the surgeon Bormentel was crouching and stifling him with a small, white cushion. A few minutes later an unrecognizable Dr. Bormentel went through to the hall and hung out a notice. "There will be no reception today on account of the professor's illness. Please do not disturb by ringing the bell." With a shiny penknife he cut the bell wire, and looked into the mirror at his scratched, bleeding face and convulsively trembling hands. Then he appeared in the door of the kitchen and said to the anxious Zina and Darya Petrovna, "The professor requests you not to leave the flat." "Very good, sir," Zina and Darya Petrovna answered timidly. "Permit me to lock the back door and keep the key," said Bormentel hiding in the shadow behind the door and covering his face with his hand. "It is a temporary measure, not because we don't trust you. But someone might come and you might find it difficult to refuse them entry, and we must not be disturbed." "We are busy." "Very good, sir," replied the women and immediately turned pale. Bormentel locked the back door, locked the front door, locked the door into the corridor, and his footsteps receded into the consulting room. Silence enveloped the flat, crawling into every corner. Twilight infiltrated it, ill-omened, tense, in a word, murk. True, later on the neighbors on the other side of the courtyard said that in the windows of the consulting room, which overlooked the courtyard, all the lights were ablaze that night and they even glimpsed the white surgeon's cap of the professor himself. It is hard to check. It is true also that Zina, when it was all over, did say that by the fireplace in the study after Bormentel and the professor had left the consulting room, Ivan Arnoldovich had scared her almost to death. She said he was squatting down in front of the fire burning with his own hands a blue exercise book from the pile of case histories of the professor's patients. The doctor's face appeared completely green and covered all over in scratches. As to Philip Filipovich, he was not himself at all that evening. She also said that however, maybe the innocent girl from the Prechistenka flat is just making it all up. One thing is certain. Throughout that evening the most complete and terrible silence reigned throughout the flat. End of story. Epilogue. On the night of the 10th day after the battle in the consulting room in the flat of Professor Preobrazhensky in Obukhov Alley there was a sharp ring at the door. "Militia here. Open up." There was a sound of running footsteps. They began to knock, entered and, in the brilliantly lit entrance hall with all the cupboards newly glazed, a mass of people were suddenly foregathered. Two in militiaman's uniform, one in a dark coat with a briefcase, the chairman Schwander, pale and bursting with malicious satisfaction, the youth woman, the porter Fyodor, Zina, Darya Petrovna and the half-dressed Bormentel, trying in embarrassment to cover his bare throat, having been caught without a tie. The door from the study opened to admit Philip Filipovich. He emerged in the familiar azure dressing gown and there and then it became clear to them all that Philip gown. "Don't let that worry you, Professor, said the man in plain clothes with deep embarrassment, hesitated for a moment, then pronounced. Very unpleasant business. We have a warrant to search your flat and, the man squinted at Philip Filipovich's mustaches and concluded, and to make an arrest, depending on the results. Philip Filipovich narrowed his eyes and asked, May I ask on what grounds and whom? The man scratched his cheek and began to read from a paper in his briefcase. Preobrazhensky, Vormental, Zenata Bunina and Darya Ivanova are hereby arrested on suspicion of the murder of the head of the sub-department of pest control of M. K. K.H. Polygrafovich Sherikov. Zina's sobs drowned the end of his words. There was a general stir. Quite incomprehensible, replied Philip Filipovich with a lordly shrug of the shoulders. What Sherikov had you in mind? Ah, yes, I see, that dog of mine, the one I operated on. Beg pardon, Professor, not the dog, but when he was already human. That's what it's all about. You mean when he was able to speak? Asked Philip Filipovich. That does not necessarily imply being human. However, that is not important. Sherik is still with us and most definitely no one has killed him. Professor. The man in black exclaimed in great surprise, raising his eyebrows. In that case he must be produced. It's 10 days since he disappeared and the facts at our disposal, if you'll pardon my saying so, look very black indeed. Dr. Vormental, be so good as to produce Sherik for the inspector, ordered Philip Filipovich, taking the warrant. Dr. Vormental, with a smile that went somewhat awry, made for the door. When he returned and gave a whistle, a curious-looking dog came prancing in after him. Parts of him were bald, on other parts the hair had already grown back. He made his entrance like a trained circus dog on his hind legs, then sank down onto all fours and looked about him. A deathly hush froze the hall, setting like jelly. The ghoulish-looking dog with the crimson scar round his forehead again stood up on his hind legs and, with a smile, sat down in an armchair. The second militiaman suddenly crossed himself in a sweeping peasant fashion and, stepping back, trod heavily on both Zina's feet. The man in black, without shutting his mouth, pronounced, I can't believe it, he worked for pest control. That was not my doing, replied Philip Filipovich. It was Mr. Schwander who recommended him, if I am not mistaken. It's beyond me, said the man in black at a loss, and turned to the first militiaman. Is this he? He it is, the first militiaman mouthed the words soundlessly. He as ever was. That's him all right, Fyodor's voice made itself heard. Only the villain's gone all hairy again. But he could talk and he still can, but less and less as time goes by, so now is the time to hear him, he'll soon be quite dumb again. But why? Asked the man in the black coat quietly. Philip Filipovich shrugged his shoulders. Science has yet to discover ways of transforming beasts into human beings. I had a try, but it was unsuccessful, as you see. He spoke for a while and then began to regress towards his original condition. Atavism. Do not use improper expressions, barked the dog suddenly and rose from his chair. The man in black suddenly went very pale, dropped his briefcase and began to keel over sideways. A militiaman steadied him from the side and Fyodor from the back. There was some confusion, through which most distinctly could be heard three phrases. Philip Filipovich's tincture of valerian. He's fainted. Dr. Vormental's. As to Schwander, I'll throw him down the stairs with my own hands if he ever again shows his face in Professor Preobrazhensky's flat. And Schwander's. I request that those words be recorded in the protocol. The gray accordion-shaped radiators were pleasantly warm. The long curtains hid the dark Prechistenka night with its single star. The higher being, the dignified benefactor of the canine breed, was sitting in his armchair and the dog Sherik, delectably relaxed, lay on the carpet beside the leather sofa. The March mists affected the dog with morning headaches which tormented him along the line of the scar round his head. But the warmth helped, and by evening they no longer troubled him. And now it was getting easier and the thoughts flowing through the dog's head were sweet and warm. I was so lucky, So lucky, he thought, drifting off to sleep, indescribably lucky. I've really got settled into this flat. Now I'm quite certain there was something odd about my origins. A Newfoundland must have had a hand in it somewhere. My grandmother was a bit of a fly-by-night, God rest her soul, dear old thing. It's true they've made scars all over my head for some reason or other, but that'll mend. There's no call to count that against them. Blank. There was a faint clink of files from the distance. The bitten man was tidying up in the cupboards of the consulting room. The gray-haired magician sat and hummed to himself. To the sacred shores of the Nile the dog had seen, and singing. To the sacred shores of the Nile.